If you earn between $0 and $6,860 of taxable income, so it's after deductions, you would pay a tax rate of 2.46% on the income that is taxable in that range. And then if you earn between $6,860 and $41,190, you would pay a tax rate of 3.51% on the tax between those two amounts, and you'd pay the 2.46 on the amount below 6,860. And then if you earn between 41,140 and 66,000, you would pay 5.01%. And this is where we're getting to the part that is affected by these two bills. So in my amendment, that 5.01% would go down to 3.99% for the income between 41,190 and 66,360. If you, so that's the same for my amendment and the underlying bill. However, if you earn above 66,360, currently anything you earn above 66,360, you pay 6.84% income tax. Under the bill we passed last year, that will go down to 5.84%. And under this bill, that decrease to 5.84% accelerates and is implemented by next year. What my bill does is then continue that decrease from 5.84% down to 4.99%. And so for anything over 66,360, the taxable income or in taxable income, the tax rate, marginal tax rate for that amount is 4.99% under my amendment. Under the underlying bill, for anything over 66,360, the income tax rate would be 3.99%. So that is ultimately really what we're talking about here, is a 1% difference on those top marginal income earners. And so that is for individuals married filing jointly earning $66,361, and it would also apply to individuals earning $1 million a year. So those individuals pay the same income tax rate on their top marginal rate. We treat them the same. Under the underlying bill, that we would treat individuals married filing jointly earning $41,191. Thank you, Mr. President. If you earn $41,191 under the underlying bill, you would be taxed, your marginal tax rate, top marginal tax rate, would be the exact same as somebody earning $1 million. So my proposal keeps those two tax brackets separate, lowers that one to 3.99, and then lowers the top one down to 4.99. Now, remember, it's at 6.84 right now. We're lowering it to 4.99. That's 1.85% less than it is now. It is 0.85% less than where the current statute is going to take it in a few years, and it will continue to go down to 5.84 this year. So that's what this amendment does. That's what I'm attempting to do. This is a more responsible way, a more graduated way to make a pretty substantial decrease in personal and corporate income tax in the state of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Vargas, you are recognized to speak. Senator Raybould, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I do recognize that our state has given out corporate income taxes. We have cut taxes, but you know, if we want to listen to our fellow Nebraskans, here's a recent poll that was done by the Holland Institute back in February. The public overwhelmingly supports raising, not cutting taxes on high-income Nebraskans. This is what it says. Nebraskans support raising, not cutting taxes. A recent 2023 poll done in February found that 68% of Nebraskans consider it a problem or a serious problem that taxes favor the wealthy big corporations over middle-class families. Again, I want to jump back to my support of Senator Kavanaugh's AM 1068, and also to the things that Senator Bostar is doing, but I would like to see the child care tax credit expanded. I think that would be a greater accelerator of young families to our state of Nebraska and a wonderful retention for young families. 2021 Open Sky poll found that 68% percent of Nebraskans support, and they broke it out, 38% strongly support, 30% somewhat, a 2.5% additional tax on the incomes of 250,000 above to increase state support for K through 12 education. And so that brings me up to this, and I'd like Senator Linehan, if she would be willing to answer a question.
Senator Linehan, will you yield?
Certainly.
Okay, so I just have to say a couple of things. You know, I have some misgivings, and I would like to proceed more cautiously. I'd like to see that we offer these tax cuts for 1 year at a time and then reevaluate. And I understand there's a tremendous amount of forecasting work that was done that should give some support and comfort to this initiative. But the question for you is, there are a number of other priorities out there, and I know you've given us plenty of information, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. But, you know, the Education Future Fund is $1.25 billion in the upcoming biennium. And do you feel that this is sustainable in light of all of some of the really amazing initiatives that the legislature and very transformative things that the governor has proposed?
Yes,
And could
I do believe it's sustainable. It's in his budget. We went over the budget. It's all in the budget.
Yes, I appreciate you going over the budgets, but could you explain to everyone here, you know, where are we at after the fourth year of these tax cuts for both corporations and for individuals
So
in that
go
last
to the
year?
governor's budget that he handed out at the end of January, and you go to page 7, which Senator Dungan and I talked about earlier.
Okay.
It shows what our current year is. It shows the upcoming biennium, and it shows the following 2 years. So there's 5 years. So it's on page 7 of the governor's budget. It has the $1 billion that we're going to put in the education trust fund this year. Then there's $250 million the following year, $250 million the following year, and $250 million the following year. So that's $1.75 billion that we're putting in the education trust fund. Then, as Senator Dungan talked about, you get kind of little rounding errors here
1 minute.
in that years. But then if you turn to page 9, now this budget includes all the tax cuts we're talking about. It's in the governor's budget. And then you turn to page 9, you still have 1.6 billion in the rainy day fund, plus you have the 324 million in the minimum reserve. So we have $2 billion over and above paying for the tax cuts.
Thank you, Senator. And do you feel that the corporations is it reasonable to have expectations for our corporations, not in lieu of or in exchange of, but do you think that they shouldn't we as a legislative body have expectations about corporations once they get a tax cut? You know, we have 64,000 job openings currently, and
I'm sorry, what do you mean, should we have expectations?
should we have expectations that the corporation should be
Best time, senators.
increasing our job growth? Things
Thank you,
like that.
Senator Rabel. Next in the queue is Senator Dungan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I know there's not a lot of people in this room yet, thanks to the dinner break. I hope we get more people back. I think one of the things that I've been trying to highlight as I've been talking, which maybe I've not done a great job of, because I still think there's some confusion amongst colleagues, is that this amendment, yes, there's a bracket motion up there. I suppose I rise opposed to the bracket motion, although I do understand the concerns that Senator Wayne had, and they are serious. But Amendment 1068 from Senator John Kavanaugh is a real amendment, and it's intended to be some sort of compromise wherein the concerns that I've expressed, Senator Kavanaugh's expressed repeatedly, are trying to be addressed. And under AM 1068, we are still having a significant tax reduction. And so this is not changing the current tax structure to increase taxes. Under AM 1068, you are getting a reduction in all, or the top two brackets of the income tax and in the corporate tax. And this is not a filibuster amendment. This is an amendment where if we took a vote on this right now and we got our votes, we could probably move on. And that's all people have been asking for the last 50 or 51 days is can't we have an actual debate? Can't we reach real compromise? And then can't we move on? I would vote for 754 if 1068 was attached to it, if we modified it with that 499 on the top. And I believe that a number of other folks would vote for that as well. And I think we could move off of this on general file and move on to the next bill. And so I guess what's surprising to me is as we've stood here and talked about our concerns, and we've talked about things that could potentially make us less concerned by reducing that top rate to 499 instead of reducing it to 399, I've yet to hear a good reason why not. I've yet to hear anybody say that if we lower it to 499, X, Y, and Z is going to happen, and that's bad. I've had a lot of people say we don't have to do that. I've had a lot of people say I don't want to do that necessarily, and here's why I don't think your concerns are accurate. And again, intelligent minds can disagree. We can disagree about projections and numbers and how those numbers are reached, and I think that's why we have this debate. But the reason I'm standing right now about this is I just want to make sure those who are listening at home or those who are in this room understand that if we reach an agreement on 1068, if we vote on this amendment with 499, I fundamentally believe that we can move forward right then and there on that part of the tax package. And so if this does go the full 8 hours, as it might, I just want to make perfectly clear that that's not because we're holding anything up. The bracket motion, again, I understand looks similar to what we've seen on the board previously, but that was a legitimate concern from Senator Wayne. But AM 1068 is in good faith. And AM 1068 is meant to address legitimate and valid concerns that individuals, not just in this room, have regarding the potential future of not just our general fund status, but also our cash fund reserves. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't remind my colleagues that we're trying to find compromise and move forward. We're not looking at a bunch of bracket motions or IPP motions or motions to recommit. We're talking about the bill. We're talking substantively about taxes. We're talking about the effect that lowering the rates would have on individuals who fall into different income brackets. We're talking about whether or not it is valid or it is correct to assume that a reduction is going to result in corporations or individuals moving here. And so I just want to make sure we resituate.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make sure we resituate the conversation here tonight to understand that a vote for 1068, I believe, will allow us to move forward. I don't believe there is any, and I'm not looking at my computer, so please don't take this as a promise, but I don't believe there's any other motions on the second half of this division. If there are, my hope would be we could find some consensus and move forward on that. But the effort here is legitimately and fundamentally to have a real debate, reach consensus, and try to move forward. So I would encourage my colleagues to listen, to think about why it would not be that bad of an idea to start with 499 and assess where we are in the future. And please understand that we're just trying to move forward and find some common ground. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Linehan, you are next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry if I haven't been absolutely clear why 399 is the right number. I thought I had, but I'll go through it again. 399 is where Iowa is going in January of 2026. Missouri is going to be at 495 in 2023. Kansas is looking at 495. There's no income tax in Wyoming. There's no income tax in South Dakota. The House in Missouri just passed a 2% proposal, and Kansas just passed a 4% proposal. The reason we're going to 399 is to be competitive and not to be higher than all the surrounding states. And we talk about in the Revenue Committee border bleed. So if you go to another state because you can buy something cheaper, this is serious border bleed if we're living right next to states that would tax you less. And yes, I'm sorry if I haven't been clear, Senator Abel, I didn't get to answer your question to follow up. Yes, I do expect that if we lower taxes, there'll be more people hired. I'd rather have them hired here than have the companies go to a state that doesn't have taxes. Also, I think, and I'm not sure, I think this is Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, and I've heard this many times in the last 6 years I've been here, that ConAgra left town. ConAgra did not leave town. There are somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 employees of ConAgra in Omaha, which includes a Council Bluffs facility. ConAgra's Omaha base is their largest employment base in the whole company. Their headquarters moved, but they're still here. If you go to the Omaha Chamber of Commerce and you look out to the east, they can show you where all the buildings are, where ConAgra is still here. And we would have lost ConAgra if we had not passed it, the bills, the first incentive bill 775. We probably would have also lost Union Pacific. So we can keep depending on incentive packages where only the biggest can access them because they've got enough lawyers, enough tax accountants to figure it out, enough cash to wait for the incentives, or we can do the right thing and move to a tax rate that is competitive, not only in our area, but nationally. I am absolutely against dropping it to 499. Dropping it to 499 means we're still the highest. That's not what I want to be. I don't think most Nebraskans want to have the highest tax rate either. Finally, I did not hear, but my phone blew up because Senator Dungman said something about people are moving out of Florida. Not true. Now, and I think I asked the pages to hand this out, but maybe I didn't, because I don't see it on anybody's desk, but I will hand it out. This is from ALEC, and it is from 1997 to 2019. What states gained population and what states lost population? It's startling. Florida has gained by far the most. Nevada is next. And I think this might touch on something of what Senator Dungman was saying. South Carolina is next. Then Arizona, North Carolina, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Texas, Colorado, Oregon. These are all net gains. Oregon, Washington. So those are the gains. You know where Nebraska is on this list? We're not at the bottom. That's good. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the bottom of losing. So who's ahead of us? New York, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, New Jersey, Louisiana, and Connecticut. They have lost more than we have. So we can say that people don't move because of taxes, but out of the ones that are at the top that have gained, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them have some of the lowest tax rates in the country. So there's, I think, Senator Kavanaugh, it's one of my favorite sayings. John Kavanaugh used it earlier this week. There are liars, there are damn liars, and there's statisticians.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate that quote, Senator Linehan. It's one of my favorites. And it is very apt in this conversation because we can all point around at different statistics and things because there's studies to prove everything that we all want. But I appreciate what Senator Linehan is trying to do. And if you watch these tax debates, the one underlying thing that you'll find out is that she and I just have a fundamental disagreement, and we're probably never going to come to terms on that one. But, we've been able to work, in some regards about it. And this was getting to the point where we're probably going to have a vote on this. This is my attempt at a compromise. And what I would say is, aside from, I know it doesn't get to where Senator Linehan wants to go. That's clear. That's evident off the top that we are going less of a tax cut than she proposed. But the thing I would just sort of point out, and this was my opening salvo, I guess, in terms, I would be amenable to 4.95 to match Kansas. I think that's a reasonable step down on that top rate if that's what we're talking about. But what I would just say in terms of how everybody's considering to vote here, we have implemented this is now my third year. We have implemented tax cuts every year. And in each of those years, we started out with a tax package. We did something that had a phased in approach. And then we came back the next year and either expanded the tax cut, we accelerated the implementation, or did the next step, which is exactly what we're being asked to do in 1063 and 754, which is accelerate the implementation of the tax package from last year and then add a tax cut on top of it. And so what I'm saying is, let's just stop the implementation of this of LB 1063 or LB 754 earlier. Essentially, the implementation would be halted for that top bracket between the 2026 and 2027 implementation. This is 2023. If we come back next year and everything is still as rosy as possible, we haven't even gotten to this hasn't taken effect yet. This legislature, this same biennium, could come and finish the implementation of this. But what I'm saying is that at this moment, let's slow the implementation and we can come back and you can finish the job next year, which is what you have done every year for the last 3 years. We have started a tax package, implemented some of it, sped up the implementation. So there's no harm by doing the AM 1068 to the overall package. It gets the second bracket down to 3.99. It gets the first bracket down to 4.99 by 2026, I think. And so if things continue, the projections keep coming in, as everybody hopes they will, which I am, of course, nervous about and why I'm advocating for this particular type of change, then there shouldn't be any problem to move it down another percent or 0.5% or restart the implementation. So that's the suggestion here. And since we haven't really talked about this, we don't have a fiscal note on it. Just my sort of back of the napkin math would say that the halt in the implementation of that one section would save somewhere around $100 million in terms of the out years of this. So when fully implemented, this section 754 has about $734 million in 2028-2029 biennium. So that's the annual cost of the full implementation. So by my math, this amendment would stop implementation at about 2026. Obviously, we implement it down in the middle bracket, so there's something there, but that's about $160 million in the implementations. So I don't know if we did adopt this amendment, we'd get a fiscal note, I think, for the next round of debate. But as Senator Duncan said, there's no harm in adopting AM 1068. And to his point, I think it would eliminate a lot of the opposition to this bill. We've heard a lot of people who favor the other sections of this bill. We're debating on this section. This is a genuine conversation we wanted to have about the implementation of this bill. And we could move forward and pass this bill and move on, and then come back next year and finish the job if the numbers continue to come in as favorable fashion as everybody thinks. So I would suggest ask for your green vote on 1068, and I would stand opposed to the bracket motion at this point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise again in opposition to the bracket motion, and I also am in opposition to AM 1068, would support AM 1063 and the underlying bill 754. Again, I think, why is this material? The Revenue Committee spent a considerable amount of time thinking through all of these pieces. There are a lot of moving parts. The Revenue Committee brought this as a package of all of the various parts of this. And the fact that we've divided the question is now leaving this by itself, but we've really got to look at all of this in its entirety. Okay, I'm going to tell you, I'm supporting the income tax cuts with the understanding that, number one, it is going to give us that headline number ultimately of 399, which I think is critically important to companies that are looking at staying here and companies that are looking at moving here. I'm also in support of only changing that piece of it and accepting it the way it is, because we're also going to need dollars for property tax cuts. And I'm going to be very unhappy if we aren't going to see meaningful property tax reductions. In fact, I'm not going to be unhappy. I'm going to vote no on all this stuff if we don't get meaningful property tax reductions. That was the loudest message that my constituents sent me this last summer, is property taxes have got to come down. And I think if you're honest with yourself and you knocked on any doors last summer, everybody's saying that across the state. We need income tax reductions to attract and retain companies that are here today. And I'm not talking about business incentives. I'm talking about we need a fair income tax rate that's competitive with the states around us. Senator Linehan is exactly right. How can you sit in Omaha, Nebraska, and say, stay on this side of the border and pay more? That's a tough sell. I mean, the Omaha Chamber's good, but I'm not sure they're that good. So I'm just saying this is something that's important. That headline number is critically important. And many of us came down here with that in mind, that we're bringing taxes down. Yeah, we could wait a year, but you know what happens when we wait? We tend to spend the money that gets left over. And I can tell you, I also had a very loud and clear message from my constituents that they expect some of the money back that they paid in, and they expect to be taxed less going forward. And I'm committed to delivering that to all of my constituents and those across the state to make this state more competitive. And that's what I believe this bill will do. So again, I would urge you to vote against the bracket motion, against the AM 1068, vote for the amendment and for the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I also want to take a second to thank the other folks having this debate. Senator Jacobson, I do appreciate your perspective. We served together on the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, and obviously we've talked a lot about various things. So I do appreciate your perspective as a businessman, and I would be the first to say we get along very well. We just happen to disagree about certain issues. My concern when it comes to the corporate tax rates is that a reduction in the corporate tax rates could benefit. And I want to be very clear. I do want to make Lincoln, I want to make Nebraska as competitive as possible. Right? I've talked to the Lincoln Chamber, I've talked to the Omaha Chamber, I've talked to folks out in central and western Nebraska, and we absolutely have to be doing everything we can do to make Nebraska both competitive and attractive for businesses and for people to come in here. There's a lot of other options that we can do to bring people in there, but I understand the desire to create an environment wherein corporations can come to Nebraska and operate. My concern, again, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, is that reducing the corporate tax rate is not going to have a tangible benefit on Nebraskans or on businesses that are actually located here. And what I mean by that is this. So in Nebraska, and I apologize if I misstate any of this, we've been talking a lot today. Nebraska is a state where a corporation can benefit from a corporate tax reduction if they do business in the state. They don't have to be domiciled here. They don't have to be physically located with like a headquarters or something in the state. And so you could have, for example, a corporation that is domiciled in Delaware in order to benefit from positive Delaware law. Their headquarters could be in California, and a lot of their workers are in California and their shareholders are in California, but they do some sort of business here in Nebraska. They receive the benefit of the reduced corporate tax rate here in Nebraska by virtue of simply doing business here. And the benefit of that, the monetary benefit of the money going back into the pockets of people, which is what this is ultimately about, right? Is trying to help citizens in Nebraska. The benefit is possibly going to go to the people who all work at the California headquarters and the shareholders of the corporation who are in California, or the people who work where it's domiciled in Delaware, whatever that may look like. And sure, is there going to be some ancillary benefit to the people who work at whatever store they have here in Nebraska? Maybe. But ultimately, the corporate tax rates are not limited just to those individuals who are actually physically located in the state of Nebraska. And so when we're talking about reducing these rates in a way that makes us competitive and in a way that puts dollars back in the pockets of everyday people, which is my number one concern, I fear that lowering our corporate tax rate is not going to make us more competitive and is simply going to benefit people outside of Nebraska. When I was out knocking doors for my campaign, the majority of people that I talked to in my district said that they just want a little bit more money in their pocket, right? They just want things to be a little bit easier. And I agree with that. And that's part of why I think Senator John Kavanaugh and many others have brought amendments like this, is we want to see money go back into people's pockets because that is what people need. That is what people want. But we've been tasked with being good stewards of not just our budget, but also of the sort of entire outlook moving forward. And again, I think that while there are certain projections that put us in a situation 10 years out that are fine, there's other concerns and projections that people have that have concerns about that if there's economic downturn. A modest compromise amendment such as AM 1068, which lowers the top bracket down to 4.99 instead of 3.99 and still lowers the next bracket down to 3.99, puts us in a position where we save, as Senator Kavanaugh said, maybe $100 million. My back of the envelope math when looking at this is about $300 to $350 million.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so, again, the vast majority of Nebraskans, when they're asked about what they want things to be a little bit easier. They want middle class and working class people to be focused on. They don't want a focus on wealthy corporations. And I understand we do need to make Nebraska competitive. We do need to make sure that we bring more things in here. And there's a number of proposals you're probably going to see out of revenue this year that I support that do make Nebraska a more competitive environment, that encourage business. But I don't believe that as this is currently written, this achieves that without some concern. So colleagues, I'd urge you to vote for AM 1068. I think we're probably going to vote on the bracket motion soon. I am opposed to that bracket motion, but I would encourage you to vote for AM 1068 as a reasonable compromise amendment and let us move on to other bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Von Gillern, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Forgive me, I'm kind of scratching notes as I'm hearing different testimony and responding to a number of different things here. So it's not my intention that this sounds rambling, but I'll try and cover a lot of these comments. I just want to stress the fact we are in a competition for people. We're in a competition for businesses. We're in a competition for young people to stay here, to be educated here, businesses to either come here and start their business or to stay here. This is a serious competition between us and 49 other states. And if we don't take it that way and we don't realize that, we're going to be out of business as a state. We've got acres and acres and acres, square miles, and not very many people. It's already hard enough to manage the economy of the state of Nebraska based on the math that we have right now. We start running businesses and people out of town, and particularly high income earners out of the state, we're going to have a real problem. I have friends that have moved out of state simply because of the tax laws here. Not because they wanted to live in Oregon, not because they wanted to live in Texas, not because they wanted to live in Florida, and the weather's great in all those places, but they left because of the tax burden. They flew back at home to see grandkids and all that. And frankly, some of them have moved back for other reasons now, but they moved away because of the tax environment. Good friend of mine moved a big chunk of his business out of the state simply because of the tax environment. We have to compete with every other state, but especially our border states. And I guess I'm really struggling to understand how we can't look at our border states and their tax rates and not see that we're not competing with them. And I'm telling you, it's not hard to move to South Dakota or Iowa or Kansas or Colorado or Wyoming. 2 of those states have no income tax. I love the state of South Dakota. I love going up there. I love the wildlife. I love the lake. I love the terrain. I love everything about it. But we've got grandkids and a family, and now I've got a job here in the state. And I love the state of Nebraska. But boy, if it was based on economics, I'd be living in South Dakota. We've got to do things to stay competitive, particularly with our border states. And Senator Dungan, your comment about the benefit to corporations who do business in Nebraska, I'm completely... I couldn't be more in disagreement about that comment. If you live in California, if you live in New York, if you live in Alaska, but you do business in the state of Nebraska, you pay Nebraska taxes. So I don't care where you live. You do business here, you're going to pay taxes here. And frankly, the state benefits from that. So it doesn't matter where you're domiciled. We've had that conversation. It doesn't matter where you're headquartered. If you do business in the state of Nebraska, you pay taxes here, and that benefits our state. It benefits all of our citizens to have that income here in the state of Nebraska. I'd rather have you here than somewhere else. And frankly, I don't care where those people live. If they want to do business here, you're welcome to do business here. We'd love to have you. I've got some statistics in front of me. I'll go through a few of them. They're regarding state rankings. In Nebraska, I'll just read through a few of these as an economic outlook ranking. Top marginal personal income tax rate, Nebraska ranks 31st. Top marginal corporate income tax rate, Nebraska ranks 34th. Personal income tax progressivity ranks 44th. Property tax burden, 41st. Sales tax burden, 26th. Estate and inheritance tax levy, 50th. It's a whole nother topic, but we're in last place. Public employees per 10,000 of population, 47th. State liability system survey, 8th. I don't even know what that means, but it's in the stat list. State average workers' comp cost, 25th. Right to work state, there's one to be proud of. Thank you, Mr. President. We are number one as a right to work state. And by the way, since we have a habit of going off topic when we're testifying, I've got LB 205, which ensures contract neutrality for businesses that do that contract with the state. Unfortunately, that bill is attempting to be killed. So right to work state, we're number one. Number of tax expenditure limits, 32nd. Total ranking, 35th. If we put in place this tax package plus the property tax package that's in the works and is coming, we increase our ranking dramatically. And I stand in support of LB 754, against the bracket motion, obviously, and against AM 1068. Thank you.
Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Van Gillen, would you yield to a question and bring that, whatever you just had, with you?
Senator Van Gillen, will you yield to a question?
I will.
Senator Van Gillen, I was in the back getting some water. Did you say that we were 41st currently in states for progressivity, regressivity?
Personal income tax progressivity, 44th.
44th, so that's pretty bad, right?
Yes, it is.
So we are not a very progressive state.
No, and that's the whole point of what we're trying to get done today.
Well, progressive, right? I'm asking you, but I think what they're measuring there is whether the top income earners pay a higher percent than the low income earners. That's my understanding of the word progressivity with respect to taxes. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I am not positive that that's what their implication is here. My understanding was that they were saying that we're not progressive in keeping up with what other states are doing, but I'll find out for you.
I think that usually when they mean it, they mean progressivity. And I think that's probably true. We do have a very low top tax bracket, and we do have a very little difference between the top and the bottom. And we made our taxes, our personal income taxes, more regressive last year. This would also, I'll telegraph what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll be done with my time. Thank you, Senator Von Gillard.
Thank you.
That we have made our tax structure more regressive, and this, as written, although I think we could work on it a little bit, is going to make our tax structure more regressive yet. If, as I think what that means is we are already 44th out of 50 states in the country for regressivity, progressivity. That's not great, and I think we probably shouldn't make it worse. So I will see if Senator Von Gillern can figure out what that actually statistic means, and would be very interested in knowing that. And in a minute, I think I'll have a chance to talk to you more about progressivity, regressivity of our tax structure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no one left in the queue, Senator Wayne, you're welcome to close on your bracket motion.
Call the House.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question before the body is, shall the House be placed under call? All those in favor vote aye, opposed nay. Mr. Clerk.
23 ayes, 1 nay to place the House under call.
The House is under call. All unexcused members, please return to the chamber. All Unauthorized personnel, please leave the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Wayne, you are recognized to continue to your close.
Thank you. That hurt. Is appropriations meeting right now? Is appropriations meeting right now? I'm looking for a head nod from somebody in the, okay, well, we don't have to wait for them. We'll go ahead and continue. I withdraw my motion.
The motion is withdrawn. I raise the call. We now turn to debate on AM 1068. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask if Senator Von Gilliam would yield to a question, and I'll telepath the question. I didn't catch the source that you were talking about, and I wanted to look it up.
Senator Von Gillern, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
What was the source that you were referencing? I heard your conversation with Senator Boer, but I missed your first part, so sorry.
Yes, the source I'm quoting from is a book called Rich States, Poor States.
Okay.
And
All right.
if I could, I did look up
Yeah.
the definition of progressive taxes. It says progressive tax rate imposes higher payments as income increases.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for answering the question, and thanks for the clarification. That was it. Thank you. I yield my time.
I see no one left in the queue. Senator John Cavanaugh, you're welcome to close on AM 1068.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'll just get to the calling the House. Can I do that and still speak at the same time? I'll ask for a call of the House while I'm closing.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay.
I'm trying.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
24 ayes, 4 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call.
May I proceed with my closing while... Thank you, Mr. President. I was just trying to be efficient. I know, there's been a lot of talk by a few people around here about how time has been managed this year. So I was just trying to manage as efficiently as possible. So I appreciate everybody's vote on the call of the House. I think that might be my first call of the House this year, but I'm not sure. I don't remember now that I say that. Okay, so we're here on AM 1068, and this is my amendment to Senator Linehan's proposal. And I started out by talking about, this is a compromise proposal. So what it does, I handed out earlier to everybody, so you can take a look now that you're sitting at your desk, the 2022 Nebraska tax calculation schedule for individual income taxes. And so you can look at that and see, we'll look at married filing jointly, top tax bracket, 66,360 and above, currently pays 6.84%. Under the bill we passed last year, which number I can't remember, would lower that in steps down to 5.84%. What Senator Linehan's bill does is, one, immediately implement the 5.84, so there's no longer any more steps. We go to 5.84 next year, and then continues the steps approach after that to go down to 3.99 for both that above 66,360 and for the above 41,190. So that's a lower from 6.84 and ultimately 5.84 down to 3.99, and from 5.01 to 3.99. And so what my amendment does is it still takes that 5.01 down to 3.99, but it takes that 5.84 down to 4.99. This is a smaller step down for the highest bracket, and that extends across all of the single and married filing separately and head of household, so it would apply across all the brackets. But so what this does is it's a smaller step for that higher bracket. It would, and this also applies for the corporate tax rate as well, takes that down to 4.99 for above 100,000 and 3.99 for below 100,000. So it is still a reduction, and a substantial reduction for the highest tax bracket. It's a substantial reduction for the second tax bracket. It's a smaller step down than is proposed here, but still a big step down. And it would save at full implementation somewhere around $100 million. We don't have a fiscal note on that yet, but it's a more prudent step. And my case that I've been arguing to you all this afternoon is there's no harm in doing this. We're still implementing every other aspect of this bill. We are implementing the 3.99 for that second bracket. We're taking this down to 4.99. And if we see that the revenue projections that everyone hopes continue to be as good as they are to allow us to continue to decrease taxes, you can come back next year and continue the implementation down to 3.99 for that top bracket, or do something else. But we have continued, we lowered taxes every year since I've been here, and every year we have come back and adjusted and lowered the brackets that we lowered the previous year. We've implemented them faster, the phase-ins faster. So there's no concern that we won't do that if we have the money. The concern is if we don't have the money. If the projections start to take a turn, which Senator Breezy mentioned this, that our average rate of growth for the revenue is, I think, 4.5%. And what he said is they're projecting 2.5% projection in the next
1 minute.
years. Thank you, Mr. President. The problem with that is the previous years have been in the 10%, 15% range. If you have average growth of 4.5%, that means you have to have negative growth at some point to average out those high years. And so there is a downturn coming, and we need to be cautious about implementations of huge expenditures like this. So this is a pragmatic approach. It's a small step approach. I think this is a better way to implement this, and it's my modest proposal for this bill. And I would say that you can, if you would think that we still have the money next year, you can come back and finish the job, but it does not prevent you from doing that. So I would ask for your green vote on AM 1068, and thank you, Mr. President.
All unexcused members are now present. The question before the body is the adoption of AM 1068. All those in favor? Roll call vote has been requested. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting no. Senator Arch, voting no. Senator Armendariz, voting no. Senator Ballard, voting no. Senator Blood, Senator Bostar, not voting. Senator Bostelman, not voting. Senator Brandt, voting no. Senator Brewer, voting no. Senator Breezy, voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting no. Senator Conrad, Senator Day, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator Decay, voting no. Senator Dorn, voting no. Senator Dover, voting no. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting no. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Geist, voting no. Senator Halloran, voting no. Senator Hansen, voting no. Senator Hardin, voting no. Senator Holcroft, voting no. Senator Hughes, voting no. Senator Hunt, voting yes. Senator Ibach, voting no. Senator Jacobson, voting no. Senator Kauth, voting no. Senator Linehan, voting no. Senator Lippincott, voting no. Senator Lowe, voting no. Senator McDonald, Voting no, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Senator Merman. Voting no, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting no, Senator Sanders. Voting no, Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Vargas. Voting no, Senator Von Gillern. Voting no, Senator Walls. Not voting, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 8 ayes, 32 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. Mr. Clerk, next amendment. I raise the call.
Mr. President, next amendment, Senator Dungan would move to amend AM 1063 with AM 1047.
Senator Dungan, you're welcome to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, you heard Senator Kavanaugh's amendment, and for those who were paying attention and listening, I think him and I both tried very hard to articulate that that was meant in good faith to try to reach some agreement. And the purpose of that was to try to find some compromise where in the top bracket and the second to top bracket, brackets 3 and 4, rather than reducing them down to 3.99, his amendment would have reduced it down to 4.99. My amendment, on the other hand, simply takes this back to the original language that was agreed upon by this body the last time the tax cut happened. And so this amendment takes it back from 3.99 to a 5.84. What I'm trying to say is we still get a tax reduction, that the income tax and corporate tax rates, as they were proposed, or as they currently are rather, ultimately end up by 2027 at 5.84 instead of where they currently are at. I wasn't a part of this body when the prior bill, the prior tax package went through. I was paying attention. I was watching at home, as I often did. And my understanding is that by the final iteration of this package, the final iteration of the tax cuts, there were no votes on the agreement that the top bracket should end at 5.84. I think that returning to that agreement, it makes sense. As Senator John Kavanaugh, I think, just pointed out, and others have pointed out, there are concerns that we have. There are concerns we have about the longevity of some of the funds we have. We have concerns about the ability to fully fund schools. But at the end of the day, I think what a lot of people are concerned about is just making sure that all of these things are going to work into the future and that we don't move too fast. Part of what was agreed upon, as I understand it, from talking to folks who were here, is that this would be a slow phase-in of a reduced tax rate, and that ultimately by 2027, we'd find ourselves with a top tax rate of 5.84. And part of the reason, I think, again, I wasn't here, but I've heard, that there was a phase-in was to wait and kind of see how that worked out. And having a phase-in and moving to that point allows you the opportunity to kind of view whether or not it's working, if it's actually causing beneficial results to corporations, if there's benefits to individuals. And so it made sense to me from the outside looking in that there would be a phase in to make sure we didn't move too fast or go too quickly on something as consequential as reducing our tax rates. Earlier this year, Senator Von Gillern brought two bills that were to accelerate that phase in. And those two bills were bills that took us from where we were today to 5.84 immediately next year. And so what my amendment does is it essentially mimics Senator Von Gillern's bill. He brought a bill, and I can get the numbers here in a little bit. I think it was 608 or 605. It was two numbers that were very close together. One was to accelerate the income tax phase-in, and one was to accelerate the corporate tax phase-in. So, colleagues, I would just say that if you were generally in favor of these bills that were brought by Senator Von Gillern earlier this year, that you would also be in favor of this bill. Because what this does is it seeks to enhance or increase or accelerate, rather, our moving towards that 5.84, and it drops those taxes immediately. So I'm sure you'll hear from others, and I probably will continue to talk again about some of the reasons that I have concerns, but it seems problematic what I've heard some folks complain about, or what I've heard some folks express concern about, which is it seems like an agreement is reached 1 year, and then the next year they move the goalpost, or somebody moves the goalpost. And this happens on both sides. This happens across the board. I'm not saying this is just one part of the political spectrum or the other, but the idea of moving goalposts is incredibly complicated and problematic. And so in a world where there's an agreement that's reached, and that agreement results in not a single red vote on a tax reduction, and that number is agreed upon by all, and I think I've heard from others here that what they said is we have to get south of 6%, which is why that 5.84 was agreed upon. And so if everybody in the body agreed that that was at least a compromise worth reaching, and that that compromise was worth reaching, and that we could, in fact, as a state, hold off until 2027 to reach that number, I don't see why you would be opposed to reducing it to that number right now as opposed to dropping to the 3.99. I said it before on the prior amendment. I'll say it again on this amendment. No one, well, that's not true. Generally speaking, I've not heard many reasons that it would be problematic to go to 4.99 rather than 3.99. I know Senator Linehan did articulate and has articulated in revenue, and I will acknowledge that the desire here is to be competitive. But colleagues, I would urge you to consider the fact that 5.84 would keep us competitive, and that we can ultimately come back and make other decisions moving forward if we see that this is working, and if we see that a reduction in income tax and corporate tax rates has resulted in an influx of individuals, if it has resulted in an influx of corporations, if we find ourselves in a situation where we can point towards the numbers and the data and see that, in fact, people are flooding to Nebraska because of these reduced rates, then I'd be happy to come back and have a conversation regarding further reductions. But what I'm trying to do is, A, ensure that we don't run too fast or go too far, and B, make sure that we essentially hold ourselves accountable to the deal that was made by this body previously, which is that 5.84 was a reasonable number and that we could phase that in by 2027. So I anticipate a few more times on the mic. I don't know how many more people are going to be speaking on this. But I just want to make clear that this is mimicking Senator Von Gillern's bills that were brought, and that I would encourage my colleagues who want to ensure that we have a healthy fund for the future and that we move with some consideration of how funds are going to look moving forward, at least take a look at AM 1047. And with that, I would yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank Senator Dungan for introducing this amendment. It's the right move to make. The reason why I say that is, Nebraskans, we are slow and steady, and we're cautious and cautiously optimistic. So we know the proposed tax cut in LB 754 are expensive and could possibly jeopardize future services that matter to everyone in this chamber. The corporate and personal income tax rate cuts proposed in the package are expected to cost more than $700 million annually when fully phased in 2027. But I have to tell you, I know that Senator Linehan has done a wonderful job presenting the governor's budget. But this morning, when we had a wonderful briefing that Senator Linehan had organized, I asked the governor's revenue liaison person, I said, have you factored in inflation? Have you factored in the increase in interest rates? Have you factored in the banking fragility and all the disruptions that we see in the stock markets to come up with clean data and clean projections? And so the fiscal notes for the bill that constitute the rate cuts are not usable, as the introduced provisions were changed in AM 906. And Senator Linehan also said that, these are just estimates, and we're really not going to know the actual costs of the impact of these bills because we're relying on comments from a January press conference, and there won't be any updated fiscal notes unless the package advances to select file. And so numbers matter to me, and I'd like to know exactly where we're going. And one of the other things, and I've said this before, that I'd like some strings with the corporate income tax cuts, because I want them to deliver on a return on this investment that we're giving to them. We've had the tax cuts, and I don't think Nebraska's in a better economic spot because of it. Could I ask people to keep it down in the chamber? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We talk a lot about Blueprint Nebraska, it is really a well-written document. It gives us the roadmap on how to improve our state of Nebraska. And I just wish everyone would take at least 10 minutes to peruse it. But this is what Build Nebraska said on some of the fundamental elements of how do we build a simpler, more efficient, and effective government. And they had 3 bullet points. Number 1, realign Nebraska's tax structure to promote statewide economic growth and prosperity. They emphasized statewide, not just in rural Nebraska, not just in the heart of Nebraska, and not in just eastern Nebraska, statewide economic growth and prosperity. And this is the point, making Nebraska the most competitive state in the Midwest. This is a bold ambition, but a fiscally responsible and nimble Nebraska has great odds of revolutionizing tax burdens. And I think Governor Pillen has done something extraordinary with education and right-sizing the funding of education. But this is what Blueprint Nebraska has said, and this is what we haven't done. And it goes to the heart of what Senator Dungan has been pointing out. We can give a tax credit now, but pause, hold. And this is what Blueprint Nebraska says. It says the initiative of this being competitive will require commissioning a nonpartisan study to reconsider tax policy with the goal of maximizing growth. Thank you, Mr. President. With the goal of maximizing growth and opportunity for all, and then introducing a clean sheet tax program that will keep tax burdens as competitive, efficient, and equitable as possible. And it's really hard to do if we're just going to go out and forecast for the next 5 years with a lot of the economic uncertainty that is on the horizon, but not taking a serious look and comparison. There's a lot of volatility in all the states around us as they race to the bottom to get to zero income tax, zero corporate tax. So this is something that I urge, and this is something that Blueprint Nebraska has recommended, that we do a comprehensive study in coming up with the best solutions, the most equitable solutions for our state of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. First, I want to take a moment because I don't know that anybody has said this yet, but ladies and gentlemen, Senator Julie Slama passed her bar. I saw it on the social medias, and what a fantastic way for her to spend her first day. Congratulations, Senator Slama. That is really exciting news. There's lots of pieces to this bill that I find interesting, and I saw that Senator Kauth had brought a piece on Social Security, which I love, and it's just a small but, it is accelerating what we did previously, and that kind of just speaks to some of the concerns about, like, we can stair-step things, and if we want, we can accelerate them if appropriate, and I'm totally on board with accelerating the Social Security, but I'm kind of like, can we maybe stair-step the income and corporate tax a little bit more, do it a little bit slower, come back next year and accelerate it some more if we think that we should. So that's kind of where I'm coming at from my concerns, and I appreciate that we have that opportunity to do things like that. And so I think that Senator Kauth's bill on the Social Security income tax is a perfect example of going back and revisiting what we previously did and deciding if we should do it at a faster rate. So with that, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Dungan.
Senator Dungan, 3 minutes, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I think you're going to receive a form that is going to be handed out here. I think it's being circulated by Senator Cavanaugh, so you may get this soon. On that, you're going to see essentially how LB 754 as written is going to impact taxpayers in Nebraska. And the intent of this is to give you sort of a snapshot of different individuals, both different occupations, filing status, dependents, gross incomes, and it's going to show you as written what the benefit is to those individuals or those families. I can give you sort of a baseline example here, and I'll let you read it. I'm not just going to read you the whole thing. But for example, if you are a couple and you're retired and you are jointly filing, you're married, you have no dependents, and your gross income is $43,944. Your taxable income is $26,444. The tax change that you're going to see is $0. No change. If you are a construction worker, single, no dependents, making $35,000, $613, with a taxable income of $28,263, you're going to see an $80 tax change. Now, moving this all the way over down the line, and again, please look at the individual things in the middle, and you see a couple, they're business owners, let's say, and they are jointly filing and they're married and they have no dependents, and they have a joint gross income of $750,000 with a taxable income of $569,000. Their tax change is going to be $9,570. So on that spectrum, we're looking at a tax change from $0 to a tax change total for a year of $9,570. I believe that that is an inequitable way of modifying our tax structure. And I certainly believe that if you work hard, have a business, and you make a lot of money, you should be able to keep a huge chunk of that because you worked hard for that. But I also think that if you make a lot of money, you should have to pay your fair share. And the issue that we've started kind of talking about with all of these is our concern is that this structure disproportionately benefits those who are in the top bracket because as a proportion of their income, they are going to be paying less taxes. Thank you, Mr. President. So, colleagues, I would encourage you to take a look at this. I think it's a really interesting chart. I think it's really illuminating when you're kind of analyzing who this affects and what the benefits are. I understand that those who pay the most in taxes need the most help in some circumstances or under some people's beliefs. I think the people who need the most help here are hardworking Nebraskans who don't make the most money and don't understand how to properly game the system sometimes in order to not pay their taxes. And so I think there's common ground to be reached. This bill is trying to be that common ground. If we vote on this and you get this added on, I think we can all move forward and not have any more conversation about this. So I'd encourage my colleagues to support AM 1047. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Amendments to be printed, Senator Slum to LB 214, Senator Hansen to LB 91. Additionally, motions to be printed from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 91 and Senator Hansen to LB 91. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Senator John Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak. Thank
you, Mr. President. So I rise in general support of AM 1070 or 1047. I agree with Senator Dungan's analysis there. I would point out that it is the flyer he's talking about just is hitting your desk right now, so take a look at that. But his previous time speaking reminded me of these previous debates we had on tax bills in the first 2 years I was here. And in one of those debates, which I think was the first debate where we kind of had a sort of compromise and we came back and continued pushing, it reminded me of a poem. And I recited that poem for everybody then, and it actually made me think. But Senator Dungan's recitation of what we've done here reminded me again of that poem, and I think it became even more apt. I think I said it prospectively at the time, and now I think it's come true. So the poem is called Dane Geld, and it goes something like, "It's always a temptation to an armed and agile nation to call upon a neighbor and to say, 'We invaded you last night. We are quite prepared to fight, unless you pay us cash to go away.' This is called asking the Dane Geld, and the people who ask it explain that you've only to pay him the Dane Geld, and then you'll be rid of the Dane. It's always a temptation to a rich and lazy nation to puff and look important and to say, 'While we are certain we would beat you, we have not the time to meet you. We will therefore pay you cash to go away.' This is called paying the Dane Geld, and we've proven it time and again that once you paid him the Dane Geld, you'll never be rid of the Dane. It's wrong to put temptation in the path of any nation for fear they will succumb and go astray. So if you are requested to pay up or be molested, you will find it better policy to say, 'We never pay anyone Dane Geld, no matter how trifling the cost. For the end of that game is oppression and shame, and the nation that plays it is lost.'" And so what this poem is about when the Danes repeatedly invaded what was then, I guess, the island of Great Britain, or whatever they were calling themselves at that point in time, but what we now would be Great Britain. And they would invade some country and ask for money to leave, and the Danes would leave when they got paid, and then they, of course, would come back the next rating season. And this struck me when we were having this conversation the first time, that we were being asked, to cut some amount of taxes, and said, well, just give us this and then we'll be fine. That we'll be happy. We need to get this, lower corporate tax cut. And then the next year we need to have personal income needs to be below 6% to be competitive. It has to be, can't be 6.1, can't be 6.01, has to be no less than 5.99 and needs to be 5.84. And then we come back the next year, oh no, really to be competitive, it has to be 3.99, can't be 4.99, can't be 4.0, has to be below 4, has to be below 3 to be competitive. So, I don't think I need to belabor the point of the analogy here, that we are continually having this conversation, and every time we have it, we're asking for more money. We are asking for a bigger allotment to the top tax bracket. And when we've had these conversations in the past, we've said, maybe we should, we can't afford to adjust the brackets in a more equitable way. That I heard the conversation between Senator Von Gellern and Senator DeBoer about, the fact that Nebraska doesn't have the very progressive tax brackets because they're so compacted. We've previously said we don't have the money to stretch out the tax brackets and actually give maybe a more equitable distribution of the tax brackets. We don't have the money last year to take that, the bracket that was.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. To lower the 5.01, I think Senator DeBoer had an amendment to take it down to 4.55 or something like that. We didn't have the money to do that then. So there's a constant, this is it. We won't come back and ask for more, but we do. So Senator Dungan's proposal is one that just kind of goes back to the agreement we had last time, stops paying the Dane Geld. And so that would be why I support it. I do think we need to have a conversation about where we can find some room on the middle tax bracket there. The 5.01 maybe should go down. Maybe that we can, if we adopt 1047, we can bring another amendment that would bring that bracket down after that. Certainly we would have realized a lot of savings if we adopt 1047, and we'd have enough money to lower, say, that middle bracket, that 5.01 to, say, 3.99. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm very impressed with my roommate, Senator Kavanaugh, being able to recite that all off memory. For those who weren't paying attention, he was just reading that off the top of his head. So that was pretty good. I don't have a poem that I can recite that's particularly on point. I could quote some song lyrics, but I don't think we should go down that road yet. It's still pretty early in the evening, and I don't want to get there. But colleagues, one of the things I wanted to talk about too is, in a conversation about what we can do to incentivize folks to come to our state and have conversations about what actually is drawing people to Nebraska, one of the things that study after study has shown is that the actual benefit to families that do migrate to Nebraska doesn't come, or to any state, a family migrating from one state to another, the largest benefit doesn't come from a tax reduction. It comes from reduced housing costs. And there have been economic study after economic study that have demonstrated that if you were to, for example, sell a house in LA and move to another state where you can buy a house that's exponentially cheaper, and from there, you save money. You have a return on your sale, and you can pocket the rest of that. That ultimately, I think, is one of the things that benefits families, and that's absolutely correlated to the conversations we're having on a number of bills in here today. And so if the real goal of 754 is to incentivize folks to move to Nebraska, I think that we should be doing our best to focus our efforts on things like reduction of housing costs, increasing affordable, safe housing for individuals in Nebraska, and ensuring that things like actual homeownership are obtainable, not just for people who are first-time homeowners, but for people who are coming from out of state into the state of Nebraska. A lot of people are selling houses in, let's say, Denver that they could buy here for half the price, and that is a huge windfall. And so the economic consideration that a lot of families make, and again, I'm not just saying this is supported by data that we can talk more about if people have questions, but there have been studies that have shown from the CBPP, for example, that the biggest benefit to individuals when they move to a place is likely going to be housing costs. So I think if our actual concern is trying to give the largest financial boon to families, and specifically young families that move to Nebraska, we need to be doing everything we can in order to incentivize low housing costs. To finish up a little bit of that conversation that I was having too regarding the numbers here, reading from that report, they say that 7 economists or groups of economists have published studies on state taxes and migration in peer-reviewed economic journals since 2000. So we're looking at 7 peer-reviewed articles that look at hard data and numbers. 6 of the 7 studies concluded that taxes do not drive interstate moves. 8 additional studies on the impact of state taxes on migration that were not published in the academic journals have since been released in the same period. 6 of those 8 found that either the state income taxes had no effect on migration or that the effect was small or inconsistent. So between the multitude of studies there, I think it's clear to say that the vast majority of both peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed, but still semi-academic articles have concluded that a reduction in income tax, either individual or corporate, is not going to achieve the effect that people are talking about. They say that one study, for example, concluded that the effect of the new tax bracket, in that circumstance, the highest tax bracket, was negligible overall. Even among the top 0.1% of income earners, the new tax did not appreciably increase outmigration. The results from all analyses overwhelmingly find no credible effect of state income tax breaks on migration. So the reason I think that's worth noting is just, thank you, Mr. President, is to put a button on a lot of what I've been saying here today with regard to numbers. And we can talk until we're blue in the face about how this is going to help make Nebraska competitive. I think there are other ways that we can make Nebraska more competitive, and I'm happy to talk about those ways when we're not necessarily talking about this bill. I want to try to keep my comments as focused on 754 and specifically 1047 as possible, but I'm happy to have conversations with my colleagues off the mic about ways that I think we can make Nebraska more competitive. What I do know is an agreement was reached previously to reduce the top income bracket to 5.84. This amendment, AM 1047, is simply sticking to that agreement. And again, colleagues, we can vote for this bill. We can vote for this amendment, rather, and I think we can move on from this bill. We don't have to stay here till 9. So I would just say that again, but thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah. I don't know, Senator John Kavanaugh, if he's here. Could I ask, would Senator John Kavanaugh yield for a question?
Senator Kavanaugh, will you yield to a question? Senator John Kavanaugh.
Yes.
So you handed out Open Sky's little sheet here about who pays what in taxes, right?
I did circulate it, yeah.
Yeah. You know what's missing from this, which I find, we've had that, you and I, back and forth about statistics. What is missing from this list of things here?
I'm sure there's a number of things missing. Is there a specific one?
How much does the occupation retired first person married filing jointly, how much do they pay in income taxes now?
Occupation retired, married filing jointly. Well, on that gross income you're talking about and their taxable income?
Uh-huh.
So, well, you're probably pointing out that they would be in the married filing jointly. They'd be in the lower bracket. That would not be.
I'm pointing out the fact that none of these people show what they pay in taxes now. So where you were comparing something to nothing, which isn't a real comparison, right? I don't know what the occupation construction, you said their taxable income is $28,000. They gain $80 here, but I don't know, $80, what, are they paying $200 now? Are they paying $300? What are they paying now?
If you want to wait a minute, I could do the math.
Okay. Well, I don't want to. No, I'm not going to burn up 5 minutes for you to do the math. I'm trying to make the point. Do you have any idea what these? Let's go over to the ones where they get $9,570 in a tax break. How much are they paying now?
Well, again, I'd have to do the math. I could do
Well,
it,
I'd appreciate it if you do the math, because when you hand out statistics like this and they don't show what people are paying now, it's very hard to compare what their tax change would be. And on the occupation finance, one in the middle, finance stay-at-home parents, filing status, married filing jointly, dependents, ages 3, 7, 12. Follow me, the one in the middle?
The one in the middle, okay.
Gross income, 89,000. Taxable income, 58,000. Tax change, $170. In the package, as introduced, is there not a $1,000 tax credit? Wouldn't they get a $1,000 tax credit for that child age 3?
Well, I think this is a specific tax impact of the adjusted marginal tax rates.
Well, that's not what this says. It says how LB 754 could impact taxpayers in Nebraska. And currently, LB 754, with the amendment, includes a child tax credit.
Well, perhaps this was done before LB 754 was amended with the whole package.
Okay, thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I hate to ask this question, but how much time do I have left?
1 minute 30.
Not enough. Okay. I have a book. One of my new staffers this year groaned when I said, print me off everything Open Skies put out about tax bills since I've gotten here. So here's from, we'll start with 2019. Nebraska's high reliance on private, well, let me go to 2020. It's more current. Today's report, they're talking about forecasting board, isn't a full reflection of the budget pain we are like to see going forward.
1 minute.
For example, there is a lag in the reporting of sales tax receipts, and thus the impact of the virus on sales taxes will become more apparent in the coming months. Also, while income tax receipts were significantly lower than projected for April due to the extension of the filing deadline, income taxes will be most impacted in the next fiscal year as the effects of COVID-19 on employment and earnings are realized. The bottom line is we're probably in for a bumpy ride for the current biennium. Going forward, Nebraska would greatly benefit from a rapid, transparent mobilization of federal relief funds. This is in 2020, and I don't have, hopefully staff can get this for me, what our revenues turned out to be in 2020, but trust me, it was not a bumpy ride. Bumpy maybe, but it was all the way up.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, Senator Erdman's in here now, so I'm going to talk about consumption tax again. So last year, Senator Erdman has had this bill a few different times, the consumption tax bill. And I've always found it to be kind of a fascinating idea and concept. And so last year, I actually voted for it. And I said earlier that it actually cost me a pretty penny in my reelection because the state chamber and the Omaha chamber invested a significant amount of money in opposition to me because of that vote. So that was kind of fun. But I'm now looking at Senator Erdman's new epic tax cut, and I think it's his priority bill, LB 79, if anybody wants to take a look. It has a 26-page fiscal note, Senator Erdman. Would you yield to a question?
Senator Erdman, will you yield?
Of course.
How do you get a 26-page fiscal note?
Say that again?
You have a 26-page fiscal note.
I know, it's great, isn't it?
I've never seen that before. I always like to go straight to the fiscal note. This is the thing that Senator Reapy and I always talk about. And I was like, I don't know that I have time to read this whole thing before it's my next time in the queue, and I did not.
It's almost like my filibuster book over is 4,000 pages.
You could just filibuster with this bill. Can you give me sort of the boiler highlights of what the consumption tax is?
Yes. Senator Kavanaugh, thank you for the question. What we did this year to make it different than what it has been, Senator, we have made an exemption of food. We've exempted food from having a consumption tax.
You are a man after my heart there.
We thought that it would be far less regressive for low-income people. So we've exempted food, and we hear all the time that the consumption tax is so difficult and so regressive for low-income people. Let me give you an example. in our current system, anybody who buys used items has to pay sales tax, because the difference between a consumption tax and a sales tax is a consumption tax is collected on the first item that somebody buys to consume, and there's no consumption tax on used items. So my opinion is that low-income people buy more used items than people with a lot of money. And so currently under our system, low-income people pay the sales tax every time they buy something used. And under the consumption tax, they pay no sales tax, no consumption tax. So it's actually an advantage to those low-income people to have a consumption tax.
So what if you buy like used auto parts?
Say that again?
If you buy like used auto parts then to fix your car?
There's no consumption tax on anything used.
Oh.
No matter what it is. So the best way to understand it is a consumption tax is paid by the first consumer only once, and there can only be one form of taxation on an item. You can't have an excise tax and a consumption tax, one or the other. And any new items that you purchase for your own personal consumption have consumption tax. If you buy something for your business, there's no consumption tax because it's a business-to-business transaction. And so it's an opportunity for us to have you, the taxpayer, decide how much taxes you want to pay and when you pay them by what you buy to consume.
Okay. Does this eliminate any other type of tax?
This eliminates property tax, personal property tax, income tax for corporations and individuals, and the most regressive tax ever known to man, inheritance tax. And the sales tax will go away and it'll be replaced with a consumption tax.
I'm going to push back because I think the most regressive tax for me would be food, but we can agree to disagree on that one point.
Well, what we did, let me just say this. We had a prebate in the original version.
So this doesn't have the prebate?
And it was nearly impossible to explain, and it was even more difficult to understand. And Senator Holleran came to me one day and said, we need to eliminate that to make it simple. And so what we had to do once we'd done that, we had to hire Beacon Hill Institute to do another dynamic study to show what the rate would be if we removed the prebate, which was about $1.5 billion. And it lowered the rate from 8.97 to 7.23. So that would be all you'd pay is 7.23. I would say the Kavanaugh family probably save 80% of what they currently pay in taxes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I'm interested in how that interplays with this bill, and I think we'll probably continue that conversation. So thank you. I'll get back in the queue.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was sitting over here doing my homework. So I just thought I would share the results. So if you take a look at what you got there, you need two pieces of paper to do your homework here. You've got the two handouts, actually, conveniently, both have my initials and district number at the top. How LB 754 could impact taxpayers in Nebraska, and the 2022 Nebraska tax calculation schedule for individual income tax. So if you take both of those, you can do the math, and you can see, we'll use the example of occupation construction filing single. So you go to the single, file a taxpayer, and you have to look at taxable income. You go down to $28,263. So you look at that and you have to go to, okay, that puts you in the third bracket at 5.01%. And so then you take first, you have to subtract the 20,590 from the 28,263. So that leaves you with about $8,000, and you multiply that by 5.01%, and that gives you $384. You add that to the $686. So that's how you get your first number, which is $1,071. That's what that taxpayer would pay under the current structure. Under the new structure, you do all of that same math, but you take that second number, that about $8,000, and you multiply that times 3.99%, gives you $306. So that's about $80 less. It's actually $78 less in taxes that gentleman would pay, or lady would pay, under the bill as introduced. So I did that math for that one. For the occupation of stay-at-home parent, married filing jointly, you can all do this yourself. You have the tools. I have confidence in every single one of you to be able to do this math, that you can do it. But to skip to the end, business owner, married filing jointly, gross income $750,000, taxable income $569,000. I would just point out that their taxable income is almost $200,000, and $81,000 below their gross income, which is about basically more money than anybody else on here other than the lawyer. And their tax change is listed as $9,570. Now, I did this math two ways because, first off, you got to do the same thing. You go to married filing jointly, you go to 66,360, you got to subtract that from the 569,000, and then you multiply that by, I did 6.84, but actually, the Open Sky folks gave the benefit of the full implementation of the previous tax policy of 5.84. So if you actually do down from the current tax bracket, it would be a tax cut of about $14,000, but they gave it from the adjusted tax bracket of 5.84. So that gets you total taxes paid under the current policy, about $37,000. Taxes paid under the amendment would be it's 29,000 plus 2,636, I think. So the math is doable. It's pretty easy, knowable. If I had better handwriting and I had more than 5 minutes, I probably could have done it in a way that would be easier to read. But the point is that we are, under this policy, under this proposal, we're giving massive tax cuts to individuals who already have deductions at the order of almost $200,000. You're giving a huge tax cut to that individual and putting them in the same bracket as a construction worker earning
1 minute.
$35,000 gross income, $28,000 taxable income, and that person is getting a benefit of $80 versus $9,570. That's the problem in a nutshell. I know that there will be folks who say, yes, but that person pays $37,000 in taxes. Therefore, they deserve a much larger break. But the question is, we're talking about what the state can afford and what is the best way to direct the expenditure of hundreds of millions of dollars. And there are more directed ways to give tax cuts to individuals earning in the area of $28,000 for single, $52,000 for joint, $58,000 for joint, $26,000 for single. There are ways to give those people more directed tax cuts that are not going to result in someone that's making taxable income of $560,000, gross income of $750,000, getting a $9,000 tax cut. That's the point. So if you want help with the math, I'll be here. But it's pretty easy. Thank you.
Senator Duncan, you are recognized, and this is your last opportunity before your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I still predictably rise in favor of my amendment 1047 and oppose to LB 754 without the adoption of the amendment. And I want to take a step back here and talk a little bit about sort of the complicated nature of taxes. That sounds kind of stupid, and I know it might sound a little bit simplistic to talk about, but the fact that our tax structure is this complicated is in and of itself a problem. And I will be honest, I don't agree with the consumption tax, but Senator Erdman, I do appreciate, if he's still here, I do appreciate the simplicity of it. I had a really, I think, good, generally enlightening conversation with Senator Von Gillern earlier today about financial literacy and how problematic it is that people graduate from schools, high schools, elementary schools, whatever it may be, without certain financial literacy acumen. And I'll be the first to admit that when I first graduated high school, I had a hard time understanding a lot of these complicated factors. And as I got older, and as I worked with more individuals who find themselves in certain situations, it became very evident that there is a very serious and very noticeable divide amongst the people who have the financial literacy, which usually is interconnected with means, to find ways to not game the system, I'll take back what I said earlier, but navigate the tax world in such a way that it's beneficial to them, and the people who don't have the financial literacy or means sometimes to do that. And what I think is problematic is that in order to benefit from some of the positives and incentives and the things we have in our tax system, there needs to be a certain level of financial literacy. And if we sort of as a state fail to educate or provide that financial literacy to certain folks, I think that can be very problematic because what the end result of that is are people who essentially are maybe unintentionally, but they're being taken advantage of by the system. And when you look at this worksheet, I know that there are, to Senator Minahan's points, there are certain things that aren't on there because they can't encapsulate everything on a worksheet. But I do think it's a really good snapshot of the different effects that our tax system has, both on a 30,000 foot level and also a really nuanced level on lower income folks. And one of the biggest complaints that I've always had is that I do feel like lower income folks tend to get left behind on a more regular basis. I do not believe, and I refuse to believe, that anybody in this body is acting out of malice with regards to that. I think that here we are 49 senators who are doing our best to put our right foot forward when it comes to taxes. And I believe Senator Linehan and Von Gilbert and everybody else who's risen today, that they genuinely believe that 754 is intended to help Nebraska. I simply disagree with the fact that it will, as it is currently written, as I don't believe there is a way that it's going to incentivize people to move here. And I fear that as it's currently written, the massive amounts of the benefit of the program are going to go to folks who find themselves in the upper tax brackets or significantly in the upper tax brackets versus people who are lower income. And the amendment that I've proposed here is essentially just a pause. It is saying, listen, I understand that people are hurting. I understand people need more money in their pockets. I understand that families are struggling to get things done. And there's been a number of proposals this session to help working families. Senator Bostar's is in there, but Senator Conrad had a really fantastic proposal. Senator John Kavanaugh had one regarding diaper tax credits. There's a number of tax credits and other proposals that have been proposed to help families. So again, I think we are as a body working towards that.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to ensure that when we're talking about these things, we take folks into consideration who oftentimes get left behind. AM 1047, I've been ending with this every time in case somebody's listening each time that wasn't last time, is a well-intentioned amendment. If you add that on, I think that we legitimately can cease debate on this, vote on that, and move forward, move on to the next part of the divided question, and we can move off of this. It's not an amendment intended to sink anything. It's an amendment to reach compromise, as was the prior amendment. And I am hopeful my colleagues will listen to that and say we can reach some compromise and some consensus there and move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. Just had an opportunity to return to the chamber after family engagement and was listening to as much as I could from afar, but glad to hear a very substantive debate continuing on this important measure. So as I mentioned in a previous time on the mic, and of course it will be an experience that resonates with each of you, as I was working hard on the campaign trail and talking to, about 8,000 of my neighbors in North Lincoln, some of the top concerns that were brought forward, perhaps even more so than property tax relief or the acrimony in our politics, was the failure of state government to deliver for working families. And of course, property taxes do play into that. But there was a great deal of, I think, dissatisfaction with the fact that we are enjoying revenues that are stronger than they have been in the past, but that those revenues are returned to the citizens in an inequitable way, and that folks who are working really hard to keep their head above water and grappling with a pinch at the pump and inflationary impacts to their grocery and other bills and grappling to pay with childcare are really barely hanging on, are working harder and harder than ever, but are not able to get ahead or keep their head above water because of these other economic factors that really impact their family bottom line and the stress at their household. And I really feel like we can and we should do more to come together to deliver on working families issues, on kitchen table issues that impact the vast majority of Nebraskans. And, I think there are some really, really good pieces of this package, but I think the piece that is before us, particularly today in regards to the construction, in regards to the corporate piece, is just a no-brainer for me. We absolutely need to have a competitive business environment, and we do. Study after study after study shows consistently that Nebraska is always at the top of the pack when it comes to a business-friendly environment. And that's a good thing. But who we're leaving out along the way as we continue to make additional tax cuts for the biggest corporations, many of them cited out of state, is we're leaving out low-income working families, whether they have children or not. And I appreciate and understand that there is a small first step forward in regards to a child tax credit and addressing childcare issues. But don't forget for 1 second, friends, that that's a $35 million piece of this $1 billion package. That tells you everything you need to know about how inequitable this package is. So if we can just moderate the corporate tax rate to provide more room and more opportunity for low-income families and working families, I think that we'd be able to find a better political consensus and we'd have a better policy outcome. I think, Senator Linehan did a good job of providing some of the pieces that she found missing from one of the handouts that's been provided today. But if you do look down, you can see that it does note that there would be at least one of these average Nebraska families that might benefit from that aspect of the child care piece. But you will also see the asterisk that says if available. And that's because this tax credit is capped at a very, very low number. So it's only going to help about 10, maybe 15,000 Nebraska families who otherwise would have the income requisite to qualify for that new piece there. So I think it is reflected on this handout from what I can see, but it does note how that is modest and it is very, very limited. And I appreciate you have to start somewhere, but I think we can and we should do more for working families. And I think when we don't move up and evolve and update the EITC and our child tax credit programs and things of that nature, it just widens that income inequality, which hurts us all. When we all do better, we all do better. And tax policy is one way to advance, I think, critical aspects of economic justice that impact all of our districts and help move our state forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to kind of remind everyone again that how did we get into this position? How did we end up with, as the governor would say, bushel baskets and bushel baskets of cash? It's because somebody paid taxes. Senator Linehan laid out who paid those taxes. It's pretty clear who pays the taxes. So does it seem fair to you that the people that paid the taxes in shouldn't get that back? But instead, every time we run into this kind of a situation, it becomes a new welfare program. We're going to go dole the money out to somebody else. And then we're going to continue to overcharge those same people and then wonder why they don't stay here, why we can't get more here. We have plenty of programs out there, many that are still on the docket of bills that are coming that are going to provide targeted relief, targeted focus to people in need. That includes child care. That includes tax credits, all of those things in bills that are coming up. But when it comes to tax policy, the Revenue Committee did a great job of building a model that makes sense. We need to pass that bill. We need to move the bill forward in its current state and move it forward. It's fairness. I would also tell you that we need to continue to be focused on the idea that people are saying, what if it doesn't work? Folks, we've got well over $1 billion, well over $2 billion. And we're going to have a huge amount in a cash reserve. So if it doesn't work, we have a cash reserve. We need to trust the projections We need to trust the work that's been done by fiscal, and we need to move forward and provide the tax relief that will provide the incentives for businesses to stay here, for high-income people to stay here, for others to stay here and move to Nebraska and locate here. This does work. The state chamber is correct when they look at their modeling and how this really works. I see it in my everyday business. As a banker for 43 years, I understand how businesses think. If we want them here, we have to have a very strong tax climate that's competitive with those states around us. We are not there today. We can be with this bill. Let's pass this bill. Let's vote no on AM 1047. Let's vote for the Revenue Committee amendment, pass the underlying bill. Thank you.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak, and this is your last opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Well, I was kind of thinking about doing some more math, but I'm sure you guys are all tired. 7:50 at night. Doing more math maybe isn't the best way to have a conversation. But I did want to just point out in the just broader context of the conversation, we've had a lot of folks standing up and saying, we need to give tax relief to the people who pay taxes. The individuals on this chart that I handed out all are avatars, hypotheticals, right? But they're hypotheticals of real people. They're laying out lives that you can imagine, people you might know, married filing jointly, 3 children, ages 12, 7, 3, gross income 89,000, taxable income 58,000. Their tax savings as a result of LB 754, $170. So that's a person who pays taxes, right? They're paying taxes. Occupation, construction, single. Dependents, none. Gross income, 35,613. Taxable income, 28,263. Tax change, $80 under this bill. That's a person that pays taxes. That's their change in taxes is $8. Just because they don't pay as much as somebody else doesn't mean they're not paying taxes. What you mean to say is, we want to cut taxes on people who pay a lot in taxes and not the people who are earning less and scraping to get by and still paying taxes, but just not paying it as much. And this is not a welfare program or some sort of social safety net. This is tax policy. This is talking about finding a way to structure our tax policy that's going to allow working people, construction workers, farmers, trade workers, to keep a little bit more money in their pockets from their taxes. These are your neighbors, your friends, the people in this body. They are all taxpayers who pay taxes. They just don't pay as much as you think that they should, or they aren't paying enough to pop on the radar of the individuals who are advocating for massive tax cuts for rich people. That's the problem when you make those distinctions. So you need to stop saying we need to give tax cuts to people who pay taxes. Yes, of course, you can't give tax cuts to people who don't pay taxes, right? You can give lots of other things to them. But in this conversation, we started out the day talking about how to adjust the brackets in this so that the top bracket still got a pretty substantial cut, and which I know Senator Linehan doesn't like open sky. They were opposed to that amendment that I proposed earlier, by the way. I don't know, maybe I should have said that when we were debating it, but they would have opposed that amendment, and maybe that would have got me some street cred, I guess. But that proposal would have taken the top bracket down, so those highest earners, these folks making $750,000, taxable income of $560,000, paying $37,000 in taxes, they would have still gotten a cut. It wouldn't have gone all the way down to 20,000, or I'm sorry, 22,000, but they would have gotten a cut in taxes, pretty substantial one, but the folks down at the other end would have gotten a cut as well. So what Senator Duncan's proposal here is that we freeze the reduction that we all agreed to last year, and we I would hope that the next step, if we adopt AM 1047, would be that we find a way to redirect the hundreds and thousands of dollars in saved revenue. I'm trying to find the fiscal note here. Let's see if we
1
froze.
minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we froze it at the implementation, it would be somewhere around, looks like saving us maybe $300 million. But yes, it's hard to say, I guess. But that would free up that money that we could do a number of other things that I've talked about, like moving the brackets from, say, 66,000 to 100,000 for that middle bracket, or that the 41,000 up to 50, 70,000, and then raising the other one up to 100,000. So there would be other options that would have to be followed up on top of AM 1047. It just wouldn't serve the purpose of lowering that top line to a, marquee number of below 4%. So that's why I'm in favor of AM 1047. It's a step in the right direction, frees us up to make some other potential changes to the tax code. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and again, good evening, colleagues. In my previous service in the legislature, I was honored to be selected by my peers to lead the Small Business Innovation and Entrepreneurial Task Force, which helped to do a deep dive and a look at evolving and updating and reforming our various programs and policies in place to support and grow small businesses and entrepreneurs. And that was really exciting work to be a part of, and working hand in glove with the business community and a host of other stakeholders across the state. It was definitely a wonderful learning opportunity. And I think it's healthy and important to continually research and check in to make sure that we are doing the best that we can do with the resources that we have to build a strong economy for all Nebraskans. And that includes, of course, small businesses and the large businesses that, of course, employ a lot of people in Nebraska as well and contribute to our overall economic bottom line and quality of life. But I do want to just kind of reaffirm exactly where we are with the amendment that's posted here, which in essence is really just directed to that kind of moderating that corporate tax cut, which would be a massive tax giveaway primarily to large corporations, and many of them out of state. And it's, I think, a poor policy choice to put tax relief for large corporations, many of them cited out of state, over and above the needs of hardworking Nebraskans that are really getting pinched by inflation and at the pump and with childcare. And there's no wonder there's dissatisfaction with state government when we continue to see a failure to deliver for the middle and working class. So this doesn't do anything in terms of ramping up pressure on the corporate community. It just really maintains kind of the status quo and allows for more revenue to be dedicated to working families, perhaps, if the body were to decide that. And I think that makes sense for a lot of reasons. Again, it's well established that Nebraska does have a very strong business-friendly climate. A quick Google search will show you that from any number of metrics. And you know very well, colleagues, that tax rates are a factor in determining the attitude of the political landscape towards business, but it also goes into account with culture and the availability and access to a high quality education, cultural amenities, outdoor amenities, all of those different things that really go to ensuring a strong quality of life that help us recruit and retain top talent and recruit and retain top businesses in our state. If you look, for example, again, at a quick Google search, you can see that CNBC rates Nebraska as the 7th most competitive, most business-friendly state in the country. And that's just one ranking that I was able to find very, very quickly. And you all know how tricky this internet can be from time to time here. Taking into account things like tax rates, quality of life, overall infrastructure, red tape, a host of other factors that we know that businesses utilize when they're making site selections for where to start, grow, or expand their businesses as well. And taxes are absolutely a part of it, but they're not the only part of it. So I caution my colleagues to not be so myopic in terms of how they approach this issue, and to be thoughtful about perhaps moderating just this component of a massive, massive tax package that primarily benefits the corporations and the upper class, and work to find some consensus so that we can do a little bit more to help everyday Nebraskans get a little bit of breathing room as they're working harder and harder and falling farther and farther behind. That shouldn't be a political issue. This should be an issue that we can find a lot of consensus on, because when we're able to do that, it takes so much pressure off of families, and it ultimately impacts and benefits us all. So I continue to support my friend Senator John Kavanaugh and Senator George Duggan's efforts in this regard, and I hope you'll be open-minded as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
See no one left in the queue. Senator Duncan, you are welcome to close on AM 1047.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues, for having this conversation with us. As always, I appreciate actual conversation between people when they disagree about these things. I think it's helpful to hear differing opinions. I appreciate Senator John Kavanaugh and on all the conversations we've had, and Senator Conrad and everybody else who's joined in. And I also really genuinely appreciate Senator Linehan and her answering questions and helping us understand her perspective on these things. I want to be very clear. I do not oppose the vast majority of the income tax package that has been proposed. And we've divided the question here. So we're talking about this particular component of 754 as it pertains to the income tax and corporate tax reduction. At the end of this entire conversation, as I understand it, this is all going to snap back together, and we're going to eventually take a vote on the ultimate bill, as the ultimate package, rather, as it was proposed to the body today. There are parts of that I struggle with. There are parts of that I don't struggle with. But at the end of the day, I understand that the ultimate goal is making Nebraska a more competitive and a more, I guess, just a better place to live. We want it to be the best place it can be for corporations, for people, for businesses, for small town businesses. The places up in my neighborhood in Havelock, we want to make this as good of a business environment for them as possible. We also want to make it as good of a place to live as we can for the people who live down the street from me, who have worked at the plant for the last however many years, and they're making on average aggregate $70,000 a year. So we have to take everybody into consideration when we look at our taxes. The biggest issue that I've had with the income tax and corporate tax reductions is not just that we're reducing them down to 3.99, but it's that it's happening so quickly in a time and period that we're also ramping up significant spending. And I have concerns that are not based in fantasy. They are based in reality. They're based in data, that ultimately we're going to find ourselves in a situation 5-6 years from now, when hopefully I'm still here, and there's going to be a time where we have to consider, are we going to raise taxes, or are we going to cut the services that we promised? And that's a lose-lose situation for Nebraskans. That is a lose-lose situation for the folks in this body. And it's a place that I don't want to put us in. And so I am not opposed to this for no reason. I'm opposed to this because I have legitimate concerns based on data that I've seen that the projections are not accurately reflecting some of how things are going to be in the out years. This amendment, AM 1047, is again attempting to be a compromise. All of the conversations we've had so far here today on 754, since we started this debate, and I said this before, and Senator Kavanaugh in his amendment said this, they're actual compromise bills that if folks were to vote for, I think we could legitimately come to some agreement on 754, proceed with Senator Von Gillern's amendment on the rest of this package, and then move forward. And all that people have kind of talked about for the last 50 days or so, that when they've complained about things, is, oh, I just wish that we could have some compromise, and I wish we could move along and find some amendments that we could finally agree on and get some things done. And I'm hesitant to, I'm not frustrated. I don't want to say I'm frustrated by it, because this has been a really good debate, but I do think this has been a missed opportunity for this body to come to some consensus. And in a world where a tax reduction from where we are today down to 4.99 on the prior bill, or down to 4.84 on this amendment, is still representative of a significant tax reduction that still increases our potential competitiveness, if that's a thing that you think matters with competitiveness. But folks have been unwilling to agree on that. And I find that a little surprising, because there's been a couple of olive branches handed out. Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of olive branches handed out here today. And so, colleagues, I'd encourage you to take a look at this amendment and encourage you to take a look at the bill. Please remember that when we look at this, the 754, as it's currently written, benefits the top 1%, folks who make $603,000 or more than most. Their average tax cut's going to be $2,844, whereas the lowest 60% really get 0% average tax cut. So trying to make things a little bit better for the working folks who are paying attention at home. We just want to kind of try to help out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senators, the motion before the body is the adoption of AM 1047. There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk?
23 ayes, 2 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Vargas, Dover, McKinney, Clements, Wayne, Erdman, Riepe, and Geist, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senators McKinney, Vargas, Clements, Wayne, Erdman, and Geist, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senators Clements, Senator Erdman, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Roll call vote has been requested. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar. Senator Albright. Voting no. Senator Arch. Voting no. Senator Armendariz. Voting no. Senator Ballard. Voting no. Senator Blood. Senator Bostar. Not voting. Senator Bostelman. Senator Brandt. Voting no. Senator Brewer. Voting no. Senator Breezy. Voting no. Senator John Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Voting yes. Senator Clements. Voting no. Senator Conrad. Voting yes. Senator Day. Voting yes. Senator DeBoer. Not voting. Senator DeKay. Voting no. Senator Dorn. Voting no. Senator Dover. Voting no. Senator Dungan. Voting yes. Senator Erdman. Voting no. Senator Frederickson. Not voting. Senator Geist. Voting no. Senator Holleran. Voting no. Senator Hansen. Senator Hardin. Voting no. Senator Holdcroft. Voting no. Senator Hughes. Voting no. Senator Hunt. Not voting. Senator Ibaugh. Voting no. Senator Jacobson. Voting no. Senator Kauth. Voting no. Senator Linehan. Voting no. Senator Lippincott. Voting no. Senator Lowe. Voting no. Senator McDonald. Senator McKinney. Not voting. Senator Mosier. Senator Merman. Voting no. Senator Raybold. Voting yes. Senator Reapy. Voting no. Senator Sanders. Voting no. Senator Slama. Voting no. Senator Vargas. Not voting. Senator Von Gillern. Voting no. Senator Walls. Not voting. Senator Wayne. Not voting. Senator Wishart. Voting no. Voted 6 ayes, 29 nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. Mr. Clerk, raise the call.
Mr. President, Senator Von Gillern would offer AM 1066 to AM 1063.
Senator Von Gillern, you're welcome to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to present AM 1066 to LB 754. AM 1066 would change the provisions relating to the taxation of partnerships when filing an amended return. It would allow the partnerships to elect to make any tax payments owed and any outstanding payments based on the amended return on behalf of the partners. All taxes are paid. There is no revenue impact to this change. The bill came out of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee with an 8-0 vote. It's only 5 pages. It's very simple. And a revised fiscal note on February 6 cleared up some earlier confusion with the bill, stating that the Department of Revenue originally estimated that an additional 0.5 FTE revenue clerk to process the amended returns would be needed. However, in its updated response on February 3rd, the DOR has eliminated the expenditures estimated for revenue operations clerk and believes that the savings from this bill from the elimination of data entry to individual amended returns will offset the noted additional costs. Due to this offset, the Department of Revenue estimates that it will have minimal fiscal impact. I would argue that it'll actually be a net positive fiscal impact because of the reduced number of returns that the Department of Revenue will need to deal with. The short version of this bill is if a partnership receives a $1,000 tax bill or tax credit and has 100 partners under current statutes, each one of those partners would need to file an amended return for $10 each. Under this bill, the partnership can file that return on behalf of the partners. I'd be happy to address any questions on that. That is my presentation for AM 1066. Thank you, Mr. President.
Debate is now open on AM 1066. Senator Dungan, you are welcome to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in favor of AM 1066. The reason that I wanted to speak briefly on this, I'm not trying to take too much time. This is a good example, and Senator Von Gillern pointed this out. There's a number of things that go through the Revenue Committee, that go through all these committees, obviously, that ultimately pass out of Committee 8-0. We see a number of things come through with no opposition. We see a number of things that come through that are common sense, good governance bills. Excuse me. This was a circumstance, which I'll admit is sometimes rare in revenue, where folks on both sides of the political spectrum came in and testified in favor of it, having commentary from time to time about the best way to do it. But there were folks who came in and spoke in favor of this bill. This, I think, speaks to what I was just talking about on the microphone, which is that there are probably more things in this package that I agree with than I don't. And that's not to say that I love everything. It's not to say that I think everything in this package is what I would propose as a bill. But one of the things that we were taught when we come into this body from the very beginning is that compromise is integral. And that oftentimes compromise means that we have to say yes to things we don't necessarily agree with and say no to things that we might agree with. And I understand that. That's part of the reason that this question has been split, right? With 754, there are issues we have with it that are legitimate and valid. And there are problems with that bill as it was written that I have. And so that's why those amendments took the majority of the afternoon and evening today. It's not to say that we're, wanting to not lower taxes for folks, but I think it's important that people understand that when we do rise with problems, they're legitimate on any of these bills. People who are rising on any bill has a legitimate issue with that bill. And I think that it's important that we give people that voice, and it's important we give people time to express their concerns. But I just wanted to take a moment to let Senator Von Gillern know that I do support this. This did come out 8-0. I would tell my colleagues to support this amendment as well. I am happy to talk to folks off the mic about why I support it more if need be, but I just wanted to step in and say that there are parts of this bill we all support, and that's why when we do raise concerns about the parts we don't, we'd appreciate being listened to and definitely would appreciate some compromise going forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to echo Senator Dungan's comments, I too support Senator Von Gillern's amendment. It's a common sense, highly technical banking partnership amendment that came out 8-0, very non-controversial, and I wholeheartedly support this amendment being attached. So I'd encourage you all to vote green on this particular AM.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would wonder if Senator Von Gillern would yield for a question.
Senator Von Gillern, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Senator. How did you get the AM number?
How did I get the AM number?
Yeah, how did you get 1066?
I submitted the amendment and the number was assigned. I had nothing to do with the selection of the number.
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator Von Gillern. The reason I asked that question is I got AM 66 or 666, and everybody gave me a hard time about it. And I wanted 1066 today. I got 1068. And the reason I wanted 1066 is it's the anniversary of the William the Conqueror, the Battle of Hastings, the last time England was successfully invaded. And just as a callback to yesterday, my son William's birthday was yesterday, and I refer to him as William the Conqueror. So I just thought that it was, when I saw it up there, I was disappointed that I just missed out. I must have submitted my request right after you did. So, I did read, look at the committee statement from, I think it was LB 206, which is the actual underlying bill. Is that correct, Senator Von Gillern? As long as you're still standing there taking questions. And it looks like this looks like a good bill, good amendment. I appreciate you bringing it. And as to echo Senator Dungan's comments, there is more in this bill to like than to dislike, including AM 1066. So I would be voting green on AM 1066. And it's luck of the draw is probably the answer. Thank you.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, good evening, colleagues. I rise in support of Senator Von Gilleren's amendment. And I just want to note for the record, one really important thing that's happening here. And I'm glad that Senator Slama, as chair of banking, had a chance to kind of flag it as well. And Senator Von Gilleren was very clear in providing the body kind of a quick update about the procedural process that his measure went through that finds itself before us now as AM 1066. There has been different approaches by different bodies over the years about how you put together different packages and how you interpret a germaneness rule and a single subject rule. And I think overall, this is an excellent example of working creatively to find vehicles to move measures forward, even if they weren't before the Revenue Committee where LB 754 emanated, but rather before the Banking Committee. But of course, it has a nexus to the subject matter in the underlying legislation. So it's no surprise to anybody with a very limited amount of time left and very limited amount of vehicles left. I think that this is going to be the year for packages and Christmas tree bills and omnibus bills, perhaps more so than in other years. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think it will help us to forge consensus. I think by broadening our lens, we'll have an opportunity to put together ideas where maybe everybody likes a little bit of it, maybe everybody dislikes a little bit of it, but that kind of approach can help us to foster consensus, compromise, and collaboration, which I know we're all sorely missing in this legislative session. So I just wanted to note, earlier in the session, Senator Lowe put an amendment on Senator Lippincott's bill that was never discussed in the Revenue Committee or in the executive session of the Government Committee, to really substantively change a measure that he had. And the body adopted it, and it was good policy, and it was a bold procedural move. Senator Von Gilleren is using a creative procedural move, I think, to put together thoughtful policy as part of this vehicle, this package that's moving. And I think it's going to be a model to help us forge a path forward together. So I just wanted to note that for the record, and stand in support of the measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in favor of the AM 1066. I brought my notes up from the committee hearing, and Jay Ferris from Farm Bureau, along with the Nebraska Corn Growers, Nebraska Soybean Association, representing many of the farmers and ranchers throughout the state. He basically said in his testimony that LB 206, which would now be LB 1066, would bring Nebraska's tax rules more in line with the federal rules. This would allow the partnership to have the option to pay the adjusted Nebraska income tax rather than passing the tax obligation out to each of its partners. In doing so, this would avoid the filing of multiple amended returns. In partnerships with many individuals and the possibility of a multi-year amended return, this could result in significant savings in the cost of preparing and processing these returns. And again, in 2017, the federal partnership tax audit rules were modified so that if a partnership adjustment occurred, the partnership would pay the deficiency rather than each of the individual partners. Some states have adopted rules like the federal rules, while to date Nebraska has not. In Nebraska, if an entity filing as a partnership needs to amend their Nebraska income tax return, the partnership is required to push out the adjusted tax and have each individual partner also file an amended return. For that reason, again, I support AM 1066. Thank you.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to ask Senator Von Gilleren to yield to a question. Would Senator John Cavanaugh yield to a question?
Senator John Cavanaugh, will you respond to a question?
I will try.
Well, you might not know. I missed the bill number of that this is amendment.
Yes, the original bill I think was 206.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to look up, I always like to look at the fiscal notes of all of the bills. And I know, right? So 206, I'm going to look at that fiscal note. That was really my only question for Senator Von Gillerin. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh, for answering it for me. So I'm going to just take a look at that. But I have some more things to say about this bill, but I think I'll get back to that later. Thank you. I'll yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I wanted to just quickly rise when it came to my attention how wrong I was and to apologize to the body and provide a quick correction for the record. I seized upon Senator Von Gillerin's opening without doing my due diligence and looking at the committee statement, and he was gracious and kind enough to point out that piece. But nevertheless, while I definitely was wrong in terms of where the bill emanated from, and I apologize for any confusion in that regard, I nevertheless do believe that we should think creatively and broadly about finding opportunities to find synergies across jurisdictional committees to help us build successful, thoughtful, robust packages on different areas moving forward, whether that's tax, whether that's criminal justice, whether that's health and human services, whether that's education. Of course, we already have some significant packages that have been put together in relation to various aspects of our tax policy and our education policy, but I do think that the special, unique, challenging circumstances that we find ourselves in at this point in this session should provide us perhaps the flexibility and the opportunity to think more broadly about forging some broader packages, which can be helpful to using our remaining time together. So I apologize for the mistake in not doing my due diligence, and I appreciate and respect my friend Senator Von Gillerin's kind, gracious attempt to provide updated information and clarity off the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so I was able to look up the fiscal note. Would Senator Von Gillerin yield to a question?
Senator Von Gillern, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you. So your bill had no opposition, no fiscal note. Congratulations on both of those things.
Thank you.
I just was wondering why it wasn't included in the committee amendment. Were there too many bills already in the package? I know we're trying to limit the number that we're putting in packages, or maybe if you could illuminate that a little bit.
It was a bit of a late add to the bill. Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, there
yeah,
was no
and
opposition, so.
As Senator John Kavanaugh pointed out, by the amendment number obviously went in behind his, which I had no idea that was such a significant number, but I appreciate his.
I didn't either.
Appreciate his history lesson, and I do want to apologize to the body and to Senator Conrad. I misspoke in my opening statement.
Okay.
Said that this came out of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee when it actually came out of the Revenue Committee. So one of the first fatalities of a late night session on my part. So my apologies.
Okay, thank you. I was just looking for a little bit of clarification. I appreciate you bringing this bill. It seems like a pretty decent add-on to the full package. So thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Seeing no one left in the queues, Senator Von Gillern, you are welcome to close on AM 1066.
Thank you. Just a quick comment again. My apologies for misspeaking earlier. I thank my colleagues for their kind comments and backing behind what certainly appears to be a good governance bill. And I would ask for your green vote on AM 1066. Thank you.
Senators, the motion before the body is the adoption of AM 1066. There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
27 ayes, 1 nay to place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators McKinney, Clements, Wayne, Erdman, Geist, please return to the floor. The House is under call. Senators McKinney, Clements, Wayne, Erdman, please return to the floor. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. All those in favor of AM 1066 vote aye. Opposed, nay. Mr. Clerk, please record.
40 yeas, 1 nay on the adoption of the amendment.
AM 1066 is adopted. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President,
Raise the call.
Mr. President, the next item, AM 1070 from Senator DeBoer to AM 1063.
Senator DeBoer, you are welcome to open on AM 1070.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I am now going to do an amendment that involves a lot of numbers late at night. One of my favorite things to do. Yay. So, what Senator Linehan's 754 does, as you all know, since we've all been here, as a recap, is it brings the top rate and the second to top rate, which confusingly enough we call the third and the fourth, down to 399. So Over a period of time, it phases it in. They both come down to 399. Mine would say that this tier 3, then after they both get to 399, goes boop to 3.75. So it takes the top rate down like it always does. It takes the middle rate across, and then when the top rate gets down to it, they go down, like Senator Linehan is. The only difference is that after Senator Linehan's bill has fully phased in, this is several years hence, it will take the second to top rate down so that there is then it will be, the top rate will be 399, the second to top rate will be 3.75, and then the third to top rate will be 3.51, which is where it currently stands and where it will stay throughout the remainder of Senator Linehan's bill. What this will do is it will add an additional tax cut for everyone who makes either in the tier 3 or tier 4 tax rates. So that's most of our Nebraska earners will get in that amount. So it's anyone in Nebraska, and I have some numbers here. So the bottom part of that rate for married filing jointly is $53,500. So if you're married filing jointly and you make $53,000, to married filing jointly top of that is at $73,700. So if you make between $53,000 and $74,000, then you're squarely in the middle of that second tax rate. And this would allow you to have a lower percentage amount that you pay on your income in that second array. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, I would want to do this because, first of all, I don't want to have our tax code be super regressive, which I'm not saying it is. I'm saying this is helping it to be even less regressive. And because over last year and this year, when we're talking about income taxes, last year, we did not lower that rate from 5.01, which is where it was at the beginning of last year, and where it is at now. We did not lower that one at all. We lowered the top rate, and we did not lower that one. Under this bill, we will lower the top rate again, 2 more percentage points roughly, and only 1 percentage point for this rate. So that means that the top earners in Nebraska are in a tax bracket that was lowered by about 3% all in between these 2 years. And these middle earners, I'm not going to say middle class because I don't know what that is. Nobody knows what that is. But these people who make between $53,500 and $73,700 with the standard deduction, they will be only getting 1%. So basically, we're giving 3 times the tax cut over these 2 years to folks in the top bracket, and we are now only going down 1% for that second bracket. And I think, well, first of all, I'm not saying let's give everybody the same amount of tax cuts. I mean, there's an interesting argument to be made for that. Everybody gets the same amount, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying top rate gets 3%, and then this rate, the second rate, gets 1.25%. Not all the way, but it still builds in a difference between our top rate and our second rate. That's what I would like to do. Now, the amendment that you have before you, AM 1070, is not quite written right because the way that Senator Linehan's 754 phases in these tax cuts is it has the top rate coming down with no change at all to the second rate until a couple of years from now when the top rate meets the second rate, and then they will both come down together. So this bill would start to phase it in sort of evenly over time on the second rate too. But we're not going to do that. I'm going to have a different amendment that would bring the rate down at the end, do the little boop at the end, because if I bring it in if I lower this middle income earners, if I lower them at a kind of consecutive rate, that's going to be more money. Because what we're doing is we're making sure that our top rate gets down as quickly as possible, even if that means we're not bringing down our second to top rate as quickly. Now, last year, if you had somebody who was making about $20 an hour, it's a good job. The income tax cut that they would have gotten annually was about $12. It's not a lot. It doesn't really get you, well, maybe you can buy a pizza these days for that. So I feel like there is a real need to look at folks, especially as we have inflation in Nebraska, in this whole country, whole world, to say, we understand people who are making between $53,500 and $73,700, they're working hard. We want to recognize that they should get a tax cut too. That we want to give those folks a tax cut too. Now, if you're single, the bottom of the the bottom of the rate would be $25,000 to $36,000. So this is for people making $25,000 to $36,000 if they are single, and this is $53,000 to $74,000 if they're married filing jointly. You add a kid in, it adds a little bit, but not much. So that's roughly the group of people that we're talking about. Last year, we talked about what is the median income of Nebraska. And it turns out that it kind of depends on how you're calculating the median income and whether you're single or married filing jointly. But it's kind of around the break between these two tax brackets for a lot of folks, between where our median income is. So what we're saying is we've got about roughly 50% of the people in Nebraska that we'd like to provide a little more income tax relief to, because, well, that makes sense to me. This also, of course, would mean that if you're in the top rate, if you are in the top tax bracket, if you're making $100,000, you also get a little bit more. $200,000, $300,000, you also get a little bit more because we have marginal tax rates. So for your income that's between these levels, you'll get a little bit additional tax cut. So this would bring a lot of people married filing jointly. If you're making $53,500 or more, this would give you a little more. Now, the next question you're going to ask me is, what does it cost? And the answer is, we're figuring that out. But we think roughly around $35 million per year once it's fully implemented. So that's the cost once it's fully implemented, we think. And we're waiting to see for sure while that gets put through the various machines that figure it out. So that's my amendment. I think it's important to preserve a progressive tax code with a difference between the top and the second to the top rate. I think that people who are making between $53,000 and $73,000 deserve as much of a tax cut as we can give them. Senator Von Gillern talked about how give the people their money back, and I agree with him, and I think it would be especially good if we gave the money back to lots of different people. So there are some folks who won't be getting so much because they don't make in that top tax bracket. So I would like to give them a little bit more of a tax cut so that we're balancing our tax cuts so that people who are getting under Senator Linehan's bill, maybe 2%, then these other folks could have 1.25%. It's not 2%, but it's a little bit more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, on 1070, on AM 1070, I frankly don't know how I feel about it. I had a conversation with Senator DeBoer about this beforehand, so this is not a surprise to her. But I do have reservations. I want to start by sort of saying I agree with the general theory and theme of AM 1070. When you have multiple tax brackets, I think it is fundamentally fair to ensure that each of those tax brackets are differentiated from one another. And what I mean by that essentially is you shouldn't have people paying the same in two different chunks of their income. So I agree with Senator DeBoer that we do need to have a graduated tax system. My hesitation comes in that everything I've talked about so far today, which is that 754 has the top tax bracket at 399, and then it had the one below that at 399. AM 1070 adopts 399 or 3.99% as the top tax bracket and then goes even lower than that. So while I fundamentally believe that working folks and middle income earners should be paying less and they should be the focus of our tax policy, I have some general concerns based on what I stated earlier, which is that I'm worried about our financial situation in the future. That if we enact AM 1070, we're going to find ourselves in an even bigger hole. And in a world where we continue to pledge money to things like education funds or tax credit funds, whatever those appropriations may be, my generalized concern remains that we're not going to have the money to do it down the road, A, as is, or B, in the event of an economic downturn. And so while I agree with the theme of 1070 being that we need to ensure that middle income and lower income earners are the ones we focus on the most with our tax policy, my fear is we set a precedent with AM 1070 that we just continue to race to the bottom with regards to income tax brackets. So one of the benefits of a graduated income tax system is that it is inherently progressive, right? We've talked a lot today, even Senator Michaela Cavanaugh was asking questions of Senator Erdman regarding the regressivity of certain taxes, how a food tax is incredibly regressive and how other taxes can be incredibly regressive. And so one of the things that income tax contemplates is multiple brackets in an effort to be as progressive as possible. And for those watching at home, that's not progressive as in liberal or conservative. That's progressive as in it changes as money goes up. And so I'm all in favor of that. And I think that we as a body should be in favor of a progressive tax structure. But again, I know it's getting late. We're getting close to the time here, I think, but I want to make sure that I just voice my concerns. I don't know how I would vote on 1070 at this juncture. I don't know if adopting 1070, I don't think adopting 1070 addresses my concerns about LB 754 in and of itself. Given the fact that LB 754 continues to have 399 as the top tax rate, even with the amendment 1070. And again, the projections that I am thinking of and that I'm concerned says that puts us in a deficit. So not a deficit, but it puts us in a precarious situation moving forward. The general fund essentially being depleted of money if some of the projections that we've seen aren't as sunshiny or rosy as maybe some think they are. So with that, I would urge my colleagues to seriously consider 1070 in a world where we are worried about our financial situation moving forward. Just consider what a further reduction, even on the tier 3 of the tax brackets, would do to our system. But I do rise in, thank you, Mr. President, general support of the idea that lower income earners should be the focus of what we are focusing on with regards to tax policy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I hate to rain on Senator DeBoer's parade here, but I understand the concern to raise to lower all other brackets. But let's remember again that we have a full tax package coming. This is one piece of it, 754. What we also have is we have property tax cuts coming. And keep in mind, Senator Linehan made that very clear earlier, that the goal of this body, and I will tell you, in order to get the package passed, there will be property tax cuts equal to the income tax cuts. And quite frankly, I'm not sure how we're going to get there given where we are today, but I can assure you that getting to 399 ultimately on the high end of the income tax side is critically important to business and growth in our economy and growing jobs. I can also tell you that every person in the state, I will get emails on this. That's fine. I got them last year. But I'm going to tell you, everyone lives in some kind of shelter, and there's property taxes being paid on that particular shelter, whether it's an apartment and you're a renter or whether you own your house, property taxes are being assessed on that facility. And if you're a renter, I will guarantee you, you're paying rent that offsets some property taxes that the owner of that property is paying. So you indirectly are paying property taxes, and you will indirectly benefit, actually you will directly benefit from reductions in property taxes on that piece of property. As a homeowner, you will benefit from property tax reductions. As a farmer and a rancher, you will absolutely benefit from property tax reductions. That's all I heard the last couple of years, and that's all I'm going to continue to hear because I understand that firsthand. Property taxes are too high, and we absolutely are going to have to reduce those, and we're going to need the funding to do it, and we're not going to have extra dollars after we make the income tax adjustments. So I trust the Revenue Committee in terms of the work that they've done. I'm going to be unwilling to vote for anything that's going to change where we're at right now on the income tax side until I see what the property tax package looks like to ensure that the property tax reductions are there. And then I'm prepared to move the plan forward. But right now, we shouldn't be looking for more places to reduce income tax rates. They're coming down substantially. Now we need to focus our efforts on property taxes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Wayne, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you. I thought it was important, since we're taking just a little bit of time and I want to get to this vote before we leave here tonight, that if the EMP hits, I want to make sure we have an accurate record of what happened when we opened this debate. So Senator DeBoer's right and left hand were slightly above her face. And when she said bloop, the right hand dropped down just a little bit lower than the left hand. And that's what you couldn't see after the EMP hits, and you can't see the actual debate. So I wanted to make sure I transcribed that part of the record, because we don't always get to do that. Lastly, before I yield my time to Senator DeBoer, we're talking about taxes. We're not talking about the game. We're talking about taxes. See, I'm a franchise player in this place, and we ain't here talking about the game. We're talking about taxes. Okay, that was my Allen Iverson impression. I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator DeBoer.
Senator DeBoer, 3 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Wayne. I did not think about describing my boop for the transcribers. I'm glad that that has been taken care of. It's late at night. If you're reading this, future nerdy senator, it's 8:51 right now. So Senator Jacobson talked about this as a package. We've heard Senator Linehan talking about it as a package. I understand this is a package, but this is my opportunity for my constituents to get some discussion and some say and some argument and some purchase in the conversation around the development of this package. I do not serve on the Revenue Committee. I am very grateful that we have such a good Revenue Committee, but I don't serve on that committee. I still have constituents. They still have individual and unique needs. And it is my opportunity now to get to try to help shape the package for tax cuts, particularly in this case, income tax cuts. I will assure you, Senator Jacobson, that I also am interested in property tax cuts. This is not mutually exclusive. I mean, we're all talking about them all moving together anyway. What I am saying is that there is a class of folks that I think deserve some tax cuts, that those folks are not getting proportionally as many tax cuts by any means, and that population of folks between 50,000 and 73,000, or if you're single, 28 to 36,000, that they also deserve tax cuts. And what I am doing is attempting to put in my argument for that. Now, I remember Senator Friesen, Senator Flood, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, whenever the budget comes forward, that comes kind of as a whole cloth piece. And then we sort of talk about it and we have some input in it because that's our opportunity to have some input. Well, this is my opportunity to have some input. And I think we ought to not just do the top two rates exactly the same. I think we ought to give more tax cuts to those folks in that particular class of revenue or income earning. I do, thank you, Mr. President. I do give deference to the Revenue Committee in this. The Revenue Committee, working in conjunction with the Fiscal Office, working in conjunction with the Governor's Budget Office, working in conjunction with the Appropriations Committee, has suggested that this is sustainable. Now, I will tell you, I am not confident that it is sustainable, but I just spent last week saying, let's listen to the experts. So this week, I'm going to listen to the experts. And I'm going to trust if they say it's sustainable, somehow it's going to be sustainable. Certainly, the piece that I am adding in is not going to affect the sustainability of it. It's not even 1%, I don't think. So the sustainability, maybe it's 3% actually. I'm doing the math quickly in my head. The sustainability is not affected by this. I trust the Revenue Committee in conjunction with all these other folks
Time,
to
Senator.
come up with that. Thank you, Mr. President.
You may continue on your own time. You're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's convenient. So when I defer to the Revenue Committee, it's on those sorts of issues, but I also think that this is not particularly rocket surgery, and yes, I said rocket surgery, when we're thinking about, again, future nerdy senator, it's 8:55, when we're thinking about what the tax rates are in terms of having a difference between the top tax rate and the second to top tax rate. When we're thinking about, we have given, or we will have given, if this passes, 3% tax cuts to the top rate and 1% to folks who find themselves within this tax bracket. So we are giving 3 times as much, granted over 2 different bills over 2 different years, to the top rate, to the second to the top rate. And that disturbs me. I think that folks within this income bracket deserve to have tax cuts that are at least a little bit closer to the same percentage that the folks who are at the top are getting. These folks in the middle are our teachers, they are plumbers, they are just regular folk. Like, they make more money than us, yes, but regular folk who are earning a nice wage, it's okay, you can live on it, and they ought to have a tax break too. Just like the people who have a little more flexibility to move to Florida if they want to, I guess. The people who have a lot of money. And there are people in the top bracket, because our brackets are pretty low when you switch from middle, or the second one to, technically the third one because they count from the bottom, from the third one to the top one. But the folks in this are, I think we can all agree, part of the middle class. These are folks who in some cases are making about the median income for people of their filing status. And I'm saying, let's not forget them. Let's make sure that when we are giving our tax cuts, that although, yes, okay, we're giving more to the top folks, because I guess, we need to make sure that their rate is lower in order to be competitive for the wealthier folks. But then for this group, we should also have some tax cuts. And we ought to do a little more than what we're doing here, so that in the end, we do not have these 2 rates at the same place. That would mean that everyone who was making married filing jointly 53,000 or more was paying the same rate. Everyone in the state making 53,000 married filing jointly. That's a whole lot of people all paying the same rate. I think there ought to be differentiation. I think that progressivity in a tax code is a good thing. It's not very progressive. 0.25% difference between the top rate and the second to top rate is not very progressive. It's certainly not as progressive as we were when we started this last year, when there was 6.84, I believe, to 3.99. That's a significant difference between where the top rate went down to where the second rate is, from 6.84 to 5.01 to now 3.99 to 3.75. There's not a lot of difference between those two numbers. There's much more difference, which means it was much more progressive before we started this. We're still making our tax code a lot more regressive. We're just making it slightly less more regressive with this amendment. So I'm sure we'll have to talk about this some more tomorrow. I see it's 8:59, so we'll talk about this again tomorrow morning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some items. Motions to be printed from Senator Kavanaugh to LB 754, Senator Conrad to LB 683, Senator Geist to LB 683, Senator Kavanaugh to LB 243, and Senator Breezy to LB 243. Additionally, name add Senator Raybould to LB 14, Senator Vargas to 111, Senator Raybould to 256 and 362, Senator McDonald to LB 562, and Senator Raybould to LB 565. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion, Senator Geist would move to adjourn the body until Thursday, March 30th, 2023 at 9:00 a.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Nay. We are adjourned.